The check sat on the glass table between them, $10,000, already signed. Vivian Sterling's hand trembled slightly as she slid it forward, though her voice remained steady. "One weekend. That's all I'm asking." Ethan Reed stared at the number, thinking of his daughter's wheezing breaths last night, the collection notices stuffed in his glove compartment, the roof that leaked worse every time it rained. He should walk away. Rich people and their games always had a cost he couldn't afford. But Mia's medication wasn't getting cheaper, and pride didn't pay bills. "I'll do it," he said quietly. "But I'm not sleeping on the couch. Before we dive into this story, I need you with me until the very end. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And let's begin. The fluorescent lights in Richmond Community Hospital's billing office had the particular quality of making everyone look half dead. Ethan Reed sat in one of those plastic chairs that seemed designed to punish people for being poor, holding a sheaf of papers he'd read 3 times without the numbers making any more sense. Mia's latest emergency room visit? The nebulizer treatments. The specialist consultation they'd insisted she needed. $2,300. He had $472 in his checking account. "Mr. Reed!" The billing coordinator looked at him with practiced sympathy that didn't quite reach her eyes. She'd given this speech before, probably twice already this morning. "We do have payment plan options available. You could spread this over 12 months. "I'll figure it out," Ethan said, standing up before she could finish. The vinyl folder felt like it weighed 20 pounds as he tucked it under his arm. "Thank you for your time." Outside, the October air hit him like a reminder that winter was coming and he still hadn't fixed the heating system in their rental house. His truck sat in the far corner of the parking lot where he'd left it, rust blooming along the wheel wells. The passenger door still dented from where his late wife Sarah had backed into their mailbox 5 years ago. He'd never fixed it. Couldn't bring himself to erase that last careless piece of her. The drive back to Millbrook took 45 minutes through Virginia countryside. That would have been beautiful if Ethan had the luxury of noticing. Trees blazing orange and red, mountains rising in the distance, farms tucked into valleys like something from a postcard. He kept his eyes on the road and his mind on the math that wouldn't balance no matter how he approached it. 472 minus 2,300 left him $1,828 in the hole. His next paycheck from the construction site wouldn't hit for another week, and that was only if the weather held and Morrison didn't find another excuse to dock his hours. The roof repair couldn't wait much longer. Last week's rain had soaked through Mia's bedroom ceiling, leaving a stain that looked like a map of some country where people didn't have to choose between medicine and shelter. His phone buzzed against the cup holder. Ethan glanced down, expecting another collection notice, or maybe his mother calling to ask if he needed money he knew she didn't have to give. Instead, an unknown Richmond number flashed across the screen. He almost didn't answer, but desperation had a way of making you curious about strangers. "This is Ethan." "Mr. Reed, my name is Vivian Sterling." The voice was crisp, professional, the kind of voice that came from boardrooms and expensive educations. "I got your number from Marcus Chen at Chen & Associates. I have a business proposal I'd like to discuss with you in person." Ethan's hand tightened on the wheel. Marcus Chen was Sarah's cousin, a lawyer in Richmond who'd helped Ethan navigate the nightmare of medical bills and insurance claims after Sarah's death. They hadn't spoken in over a year. "What kind of proposal?" "The kind that requires discretion and pays well. Are you available tomorrow afternoon? I can meet you in Richmond." Well, every instinct Ethan had developed in 34 years of life told him to hang up. Rich people didn't call working-class single fathers in rural Virginia with legitimate business proposals. This was either a scam or something worse, but that number, $2,300, sat in his head like a weight. "What time?" he heard himself ask. 2 o'clock. Sterling Tower on East Carey Street. Ask for me at the front desk." She paused, and something in the silence felt calculated. "I appreciate your willingness to listen, Mr. Reed." The line went dead before he could respond. Ethan drove the rest of the way home in silence, Vivian Sterling's voice echoing in his head. He pulled into the gravel driveway of their rental just as the school bus rumbled to a stop at the end of their dirt road. Through the rearview mirror, he watched Mia climb down the steps, her princess backpack nearly as big as she was, her dark curls escaping from the ponytail he'd attempted that morning. She saw his truck, and her whole face lit up in a way that made his chest hurt. "Daddy!" She ran toward him with the fearless speed of 8-year-old girls who hadn't yet learned the world was full of things that could hurt them. Ethan caught her as she launched herself at him, breathing in the strawberry shampoo smell of her hair. "Guess what happened at school today?" "What happened, baby girl?" "Mrs. Patterson said my story about the princess and the dragon was so good she's going to put it on the bulletin board." Mia pulled back to look at him with Sarah's eyes, gray-green and full of light. "She said I have a gift for storytelling." "That's because you do." Ethan set her down, keeping one hand on her shoulder as they walked toward the house. "Your mama was a storyteller too. You get it from her." "I wish I could remember her stories better." Mia's voice went soft in that way that always killed him. "Sometimes I can't remember what she sounded like." Ethan unlocked the front door, guiding her inside before his own throat could close up. "That's okay. I remember for both of us. Now, how about you show me that story while I make us some dinner?" The house smelled like old wood and the faint mustiness that came from windows that didn't quite seal right. Ethan had done what he could to make it a home. Sarah's paintings still hung on the walls. Mia's drawings covered the refrigerator, and he kept everything clean even when exhaustion made him want to collapse. But it was still just a rental, still temporary, still not quite enough. While Mia did her homework at the kitchen table, chattering about her day, Ethan pulled together dinner from what they had left. Pasta with butter and frozen vegetables. Not exactly nutritious, but it was what the budget allowed this late in the month. He'd learned to stretch groceries the way he'd learned everything else about single parenting, through trial, error, and the constant low-grade panic of knowing one mistake could tip them into real trouble. After dinner, after helping Mia with her math homework, after her bath and stories and the nebulizer treatment she pretended not to hate, Ethan finally sat down on their worn couch and pulled out his phone. He Googled Vivian Sterling. The results made his stomach drop. Sterling Acquisitions, CEO and founder. Self-made millionaire by 32. Listed in Virginia Business Magazine's 40 Under 40. She wore designer suits in all her photos, standing in front of glass buildings or shaking hands with people who looked like they'd never worried about a light bill in their lives. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a style that probably had a name he didn't know. Her smile was professional, polished, and didn't quite reach her eyes. What the hell did a woman like that want with him? Ethan clicked through to an interview from 6 months ago. The reporter asked about her success, her business philosophy, her plans for expansion. Vivian Sterling answered every question with the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no. But there was something else there too, hidden in the precise way she chose her words. Something that looked almost like loneliness, if you knew how to recognize it. He closed the browser and sat in the dark living room, listening to Mia's soft breathing from her bedroom down the hall. The smart thing would be to call Vivian Sterling tomorrow and politely decline whatever this was. The safe thing would be to keep his head down, work his shifts, and find a legal way to pay off the medical bills even if it took years. But Ethan had learned the hard way that sometimes smart and safe still left you broke and desperate. At 1:47 the next afternoon, Ethan stood in front of Sterling Tower trying not to feel like an imposter. The building was all glass and steel, reflecting the October sky in a way that made it seem like it existed in a different dimension from the one where he paid rent and fixed roof leaks. Men in suits walked past him without a second glance. Women in heels clicked by, talking into phones about mergers and acquisitions and other words that meant money changing hands. Ethan looked down at his own clothes, the one button-down shirt he owned that didn't have paint stains, jeans that were clean but faded, work boots because he didn't own anything else. He'd shaved that morning and tried to tame his hair, but he still looked like exactly what he was, a construction worker pretending to have business in a place like this. Inside, the lobby was even more intimidating. Marble floors, a waterfall feature that probably cost more than his annual salary, security guards who watched everyone with the kind of attention that came from actually getting paid well. Ethan approached the curved reception desk where a young woman with perfect makeup looked up at him with polite curiosity. "I have a 2 o'clock appointment with Vivian Sterling," he said, trying to sound like this was normal. The receptionist's expression flickered with something, surprise maybe, or curiosity, before smoothing back into professionalism. "Name?" "Ethan Reed." She typed something, picked up a phone, murmured words he couldn't hear. Then she smiled at him in a way that felt rehearsed. Ms. Sterling will see you now. 23rd floor, suite 2301. The elevator is just past the security desk. The elevator was glass on one side, showing Richmond dropping away as Ethan rose through the building. He kept his eyes forward, breathing slowly, reminding himself that he was here to listen. That's all. Just listen to whatever proposal this woman had, thank her for her time, and leave. Suite 2301 was less of a suite and more of a corner office that could have held his entire house. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city. The furniture was modern and expensive in that way, where everything looked uncomfortable on purpose. And behind a desk of polished black wood sat Vivian Sterling. She was smaller than he'd expected from her photos. Maybe 5'6", even in the heels she wore. Her dark hair was pulled back exactly like in the pictures, and she wore a gray suit that probably cost what he made in a month. But it was her eyes that caught him, dark brown, sharp, and currently sizing him up in a way that made him feel like a balance sheet she was trying to audit. Mr. Reed, she stood, extending a hand across the desk. Thank you for coming. Her handshake was firm, businesslike. Ethan noticed she wore no wedding ring, no jewelry except small diamond studs that probably cost more than his truck. Ms. Sterling, please sit. She gestured to one of the modern chairs across from her desk. I appreciate your discretion in coming here. Can I offer you anything? Coffee? Water? I'm fine, thank you. Ethan sat carefully, aware of how out of place he looked in this chrome and glass environment. Your assistant mentioned a business proposal. Yes. Vivian returned to her chair, and for the first time he saw something flicker across her face that looked almost like uncertainty. She pulled a folder from her desk drawer, opened it, and seemed to be choosing her words carefully. I'm going to be direct with you, Mr. Reed, because I don't see the point in wasting either of our time. I need someone to pose as my boyfriend for one weekend. Ethan blinked. Excuse me? My parents are celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary this weekend. Family gathering at their estate on Smith Mountain Lake. Very traditional, very judgmental environment. Vivian's fingers tapped once against the folder, the only sign of nervousness. I've successfully avoided these events for the past 2 years, but this one is unavoidable. And if I show up alone again, I'll spend the entire weekend fielding questions about my personal life, enduring setup attempts, and listening to lectures about how my career is making me cold and unmarriageable. So hire an escort service, Ethan said flatly. Why call me? Because escort services are businesses, and businesses talk. I need someone with no connection to my professional world, no reason to gossip, and no illusions about what this arrangement entails. She paused, studying him with those sharp eyes. Marcus Chen mentioned you're a private person, that you've kept your head down since your wife passed away, that you could use an opportunity that pays well for minimal actual work. Something hot and uncomfortable twisted in Ethan's gut. He should have known Marcus was behind this, that somehow his connection to Sarah's family had leaked into this strange woman's world. Marcus had no right. I paid him as a consultant for the referral, if that matters. Vivian's voice remained steady. This is a legitimate business transaction, Mr. Reed. I'm not asking you to do anything illegal or unethical. I simply need someone to spend a weekend at my parents' estate, pretend to be my boyfriend, and be convincing enough that my family stops treating me like a problem to be solved. Why me, specifically? There have to be 100 guys in Richmond who could play that part better than a construction worker from Millbrook. For the first time, something that looked almost like respect crossed Vivian's face. Because my parents would see through someone too polished in about 30 seconds. They'd know I hired an actor or borrowed someone from my business circle, but you, she gestured at him in a way that wasn't quite insulting. You're real. You have a real job, a real life, a real daughter. You're exactly the kind of man they'd believe I'd be dating if I were actually dating anyone. Because I'm beneath you? The words came out harder than Ethan intended. Because you're genuine, Vivian corrected, and her tone sharpened, which is apparently rare enough in my world to be valuable. Look, I understand this is strange. I understand you probably think I'm insane or desperate or both. But I'm offering you $10,000 for 3 days of your time. Arrive Friday evening, leave Monday morning. All expenses paid, plus the fee. All you have to do is be pleasant, follow my lead on our backstory, and not embarrass me in front of my family. $10,000. Ethan heard the number, and everything else in the room seemed to fade. That was the medical bills, the roof repair, Mia's medication for the next 6 months, and enough left over to actually sleep at night without calculating which utility bill he could delay longest. "I need to think about it," he said, because agreeing immediately felt like surrendering something he couldn't afford to lose. Vivian pulled a check from the folder and slid it across the desk. It was already filled out, $10,000, made out to Ethan Reed, signed in confident handwriting. "I need an answer by tomorrow morning. If you agree, we'll meet Thursday afternoon to coordinate our story. The event starts Friday at 6 p.m. Ethan stared at the check. His daughter's face flashed in his mind. Mia, who deserved better than a father who couldn't afford her medicine, who deserved more than this constant scramble to keep them afloat. "And if I say no?" "Then I tear up the check and we never speak again." Vivian's expression was unreadable. But Marcus seemed to think you could use the opportunity, and I'm good at reading people, Mr. Reed. You wouldn't be here if you didn't need the money." She wasn't wrong, which made it worse somehow. Ethan reached for the check, his fingers hesitating just before touching it. "One condition." Vivian's eyebrow arched. "I'm listening." "I'm not sleeping on the sofa." The words surprised him, even as he said them, but something about this woman's calculated control made him want to push back. "If we're selling this as a real relationship, then we're sharing a room. Your family will notice if you stick me in the guest quarters like hired help." For a long moment, Vivian just looked at him. Then slowly she smiled. A real smile this time, not the polished professional version. "Fair enough. Separate beds, but same room. Anything else?" "I need to arrange care for my daughter. And I'm not lying to her about where I'm going. Tell her you have a work opportunity in Richmond." "That's technically true." Vivian stood, extending her hand again. "Do we have a deal, Mr. Reed?" Ethan looked at her hand, at the check on the desk, at this strange woman who was offering him more money than he'd seen in one place since Sarah's life insurance barely covered the funeral costs. Every rational thought in his head screamed that this was a mistake. That people like Vivian Sterling didn't make offers like this without hidden costs he couldn't see yet. But Mia's breathing treatments cost $40 a week, and the roof was getting worse, and $10,000 was $10,000. He shook Vivian's hand. "We have a deal." The next 48 hours passed in a blur of arrangements that made Ethan feel like he'd stumbled into someone else's life. Thursday afternoon, he met Vivian at a coffee shop in Richmond where she handed him a typed document labeled Relationship Background, Memorize. They'd been dating for 4 months. They met through a mutual friend, Marcus, convenient since he could back up the story. Ethan worked in construction but was exploring project management opportunities. Vivian was taking a step back from acquisitions to focus on sustainability initiatives, which apparently meant she was lying to her parents about how much she was actually working. "They worry," Vivian explained, stirring her coffee with mechanical precision, "about my health, my stress levels, my complete lack of work-life balance. It's easier to tell them what they want to hear than to explain that my company is my life, and I'm fine with that." "Are you?" Ethan asked, studying her across the small table. "Fine with that?" Vivian's stirring paused for just a moment. "That's not what you're being paid to ask." "Fair enough." They went over details. How they met, their first date, a gallery opening that never happened, what Ethan supposedly liked about her, her intelligence and drive, keep it simple, what she supposedly liked about him, his groundedness and the way he was with his daughter, which felt too close to real for comfort. Vivian spoke about it all like she was planning a corporate presentation, complete with talking points and potential questions to deflect. "What if they ask about Mia?" Ethan asked. "About her mother?" "Then tell them the truth." Vivian met his eyes with unexpected directness. "Sarah died in a car accident 3.5 years ago. You've been raising Mia alone since then. It's nothing to be ashamed of, and lying about something like that would be cruel." She paused. "My parents aren't monsters, Mr. Reed. They're just traditional and concerned, and unfortunately convinced that my worth as a human being is directly tied to my relationship status." There was something in her voice when she said that last part, something bitter and resigned that made Ethan wonder what kind of parents made their daughter feel like she needed to hire a fake boyfriend rather than just show up alone. Friday evening arrived faster than Ethan was ready for. He'd arranged for his mother to stay with Mia, telling her he had a work opportunity in Richmond that could lead to better pay. Not exactly a lie. His mother had looked at him with concern and questions she didn't ask, just kissed his cheek and told him to be careful. "I'm always careful," Ethan had said. "That's what worries me," she'd replied. Vivian picked him up at his house in a black Mercedes that looked like it had never seen dirt. She'd dressed down from her usual business attire, dark jeans, a cream-colored sweater, leather jacket, but somehow still looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Ethan had packed his one decent overnight bag with the few clothes he owned that didn't have stains or holes, feeling acutely aware that he was about to enter a world where he didn't know the rules. "Ready?" Vivian asked as he climbed into the passenger seat. "No," Ethan said honestly, "but let's go anyway." The drive to Smith Mountain Lake took just over 2 hours, most of it in silence. Vivian drove like she did everything else, precisely, confidently, with a GPS voice she ignored because she already knew the way. Ethan watched the landscape change from city to suburbs to rural Virginia, mountains rising against the darkening sky. "Tell me about your parents," he said finally, needing to break the silence that had started to feel heavy. "Not the backstory stuff. Really tell me about them." Vivian's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "My father, Richard Sterling, is a retired corporate attorney. My mother, Caroline, was a socialite who now dedicates her time to charity boards and making sure everyone knows how disappointed she is in my life choices." She said it matter-of-factly, but Ethan heard the edge underneath. "They met at Yale, married at 23, had me at 25. Everything was planned, proper, perfect. And then I went and became exactly what my father trained me to be, ruthless, ambitious, successful. And they decided they didn't like it after all." "Because you're a woman?" "Because I'm unmarried." Vivian took a turn onto a smaller road, trees closing in on either side. "If I were a man with my exact career, they'd be proud. But as a 32-year-old woman who chose business over family, I'm a problem, a failure. A source of constant concern in dinner table lectures about biological clocks and dying alone." Ethan thought about his own mother, who never once made him feel like less because Sarah was gone and he was raising Mia alone. Who'd helped without judgment, loved without conditions, and never suggested that his worth was tied to finding someone new. "That sounds exhausting." "It is." Vivian glanced at him briefly before returning her eyes to the road. "Which is why I'm paying you $10,000 to make it stop for one weekend." They drove through iron gates just after 7 o'clock, following a private road that wound through woods before opening onto a view that made Ethan's breath catch despite himself. The lake spread out below them like polished glass, reflecting the last purple light of sunset. And perched on a slope overlooking the water sat a house that could have been on a magazine cover, all stone and timber and glass, sprawling across what had to be at least 5 acres. "Jesus," Ethan muttered. "Welcome to the Sterling family estate," Vivian said dryly, "where everything looks perfect and nothing actually is." She parked in a circular drive beside 3 other expensive cars. Before they could get out, the front door opened and a couple emerged onto the lit porch. Richard Sterling looked exactly like Ethan had imagined, tall, silver-haired, wearing casual clothes that still somehow communicated wealth and authority. Caroline Sterling was smaller, elegant in that way rich women achieved through decades of yoga and expensive skincare, her smile polite and appraising as she watched them approach. "Showtime," Vivian murmured. Then louder, warmer, as she opened her door. "Mom, Dad, we're here!" Ethan climbed out of the car, shouldering his bag, trying not to feel like an actor who'd walked onto stage without knowing his lines. Vivian appeared at his side, and suddenly her hand slipped into his, warm, small, and trembling just slightly in a way he didn't think anyone else would notice. "Mom, Dad," Vivian said, her voice taking on a brightness that sounded almost real. "This is Ethan Reed. Ethan, my parents, Richard and Caroline Sterling." Richard stepped forward first, his handshake firm and measuring. "Mr. Reed, Vivian's told us very little about you, which of course makes us very curious." "Nice to meet you, sir." Ethan met his eyes steadily, using the same tone he used with difficult foremen on construction sites, respectful but not subordinate. "Sorry for the mystery. Vivian wanted to make sure we were serious before bringing me into family events." Caroline moved in for a brief perfumed hug that felt like an assessment. "Well, you're here now, and we're delighted to meet you. Please come in. Dinner will be ready soon, and I'm sure you'd both like to freshen up after the drive. The inside of the house was exactly what Ethan expected. High ceilings, exposed beams, a stone fireplace large enough to stand in, furniture that was both rustic and expensive. Family photos lined the walls, tracking Vivian's progression from a serious-looking child to an even more serious-looking adult. In none of them was she smiling like she really meant it. "I've put you in the blue room," Caroline said, leading them up a staircase that had probably been hand-carved by someone who got paid more for it than Ethan made in a year. "I hope you'll be comfortable. It has a lovely view of the lake." The blue room was actually a suite. Bedroom, sitting area, and a bathroom with a tub that could fit 3 people. 2 beds sat on opposite sides of the room, already made up with linens that looked like they'd never been slept in. Ethan caught Vivian's eye and saw the flicker of acknowledgement. Separate beds, same room, just like they'd agreed. "This is perfect, Mom," Vivian said, setting down her bag. "Thank you." "Dinner in 30 minutes, Caroline said, her eyes lingering on Ethan with obvious curiosity before she left them alone. As soon as the door closed, Vivian's bright smile vanished like a light being switched off. She sank onto one of the beds, suddenly looking more tired than Ethan had seen her. "Well, that was the easy part." "Your mom seems nice," Ethan offered, unpacking his limited wardrobe and trying not to compare his worn duffel to Vivian's sleek luggage. "She is nice. That's what makes it hard." Vivian lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. "If they were terrible parents, this would be simple. But they love me, in their way. They just love some version of me that doesn't actually exist, the one who'd give up her company to marry someone appropriate and produce grandchildren on schedule." Ethan pulled out the only button-down shirt he'd brought that wasn't the one he'd worn to their first meeting. "For what it's worth, the version of you I've met seems fine." Vivian turned her head to look at him, surprise flickering across her face. "You've known me for 3 days. And in those 3 days, you've been direct, organized, and honest about what you want. Those aren't bad qualities." Ethan headed toward the bathroom to change, pausing at the door. "Even if what you want is weird enough that you have to pay someone to pretend to date you." He caught her laugh just before he closed the door. A real one this time, startled and genuine, and somehow it made this whole strange situation feel slightly less impossible. Dinner was served in a dining room that overlooked the lake, now dark except for the reflection of stars and the warm glow from the house spilling across the water. The table could have seated 12 easily, but tonight it was just the 4 of them, which somehow made the space feel even larger. Crystal glasses caught the candlelight. Silver clinked against china that probably cost more per plate than Ethan's monthly grocery budget. Richard Sterling sat at the head of the table, carving a roast that looked like something from a cooking show. Caroline had arranged everything with the kind of precision that came from decades of hosting, and Vivian sat across from Ethan, her posture perfect, her smile fixed in place like armor. "So, Ethan," Richard said, serving portions with surgical precision, "Vivian mentioned you work in construction. What exactly do you do?" Ethan accepted the plate Caroline passed him, aware of 3 sets of eyes watching his response. "I'm a site supervisor for Morrison Construction. We do residential and some light commercial work, renovations, additions, new builds. Right now we're finishing a housing development outside Millbrook." "Millbrook?" Caroline repeated as if testing the word. "That's quite a drive from Richmond. How did you and Vivian meet?" This was the script they'd rehearsed. Ethan kept his voice casual, reaching for his water glass. "Through Marcus Chen, actually. He's Sarah's, my late wife's, cousin. He and Vivian were working on some legal matter, and we ended up at the same charity event back in June." "A charity event," Richard said, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. "Which one?" Vivian's foot tapped Ethan's under the table. A warning. They hadn't prepared for that level of detail, but Ethan had learned long ago that the best way through an interrogation was to stay close to the truth. "The Children's Hospital fundraiser. I was there with my daughter, Mia. She spent 3 weeks in their PICU when she was 5, so we try to give back when we can." Something shifted in Caroline's expression, not warmth exactly, but a softening around the edges. "How old is your daughter now?" 8. "She's with my mother this weekend." Ethan cut into his roast, which was predictably perfect. Smart as a whip, brave as hell, and way too good at getting me wrapped around her little finger. "Language," Richard said mildly, but there was the ghost of a smile at the corner of his mouth. Sorry. Ethan met his eyes without flinching. Hazard of working construction sites. I try to watch it around Mia, but sometimes things slip through. Vivian was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Surprise maybe, or something close to approval. She'd been tense since they sat down, but now some of that tension seemed to ease. Ethan's actually amazing with Mia. I've never seen a father more devoted. And what does Mia think of you dating her father? Caroline asked, directing the question at Vivian with maternal precision. For the first time that evening, Vivian's polished facade cracked just slightly. We're taking it slow. I've met her a few times, but we're not rushing anything. She's been through enough without adding complications. It was a good answer, Ethan thought. Responsible and considerate, exactly what concerned parents would want to hear. But there was something in the way Vivian said it, a carefulness that suggested she'd actually thought about what it would mean to be part of a child's life. Which was ridiculous, because this was all pretend. Just a performance for 3 days that would end Monday morning when she drove him back to his real life. Very wise, Caroline said, though her expression suggested she had more questions queued up. And what do your parents think of Vivian, Ethan? My mom thinks she's wonderful, Ethan said, which was at least theoretically true since his mother didn't know Vivian existed. My dad passed away when I was 15, so it's just been her and me for a long time. She's mostly just happy I'm not spending every night fixing things around the house and falling asleep on the couch. Richard set down his fork with deliberate care. I'm sorry for your loss. Losing a parent young is difficult. Thank you, sir. Ethan took a drink of wine that tasted expensive and complicated. He was a good man, taught me everything I know about building and fixing things. I wish Mia could have known him. The conversation drifted after that into safer territory. Richard's golf game, Caroline's work with various charity boards, the unseasonably warm October they were having. Vivian participated with practiced ease, laughing at her father's stories, asking her mother about people whose names meant nothing to Ethan. But under the table, her foot stayed close to his, a small point of contact that felt like an anchor in unfamiliar waters. After dinner, Caroline suggested coffee on the terrace. The night air was cool but not cold, carrying the smell of pine and water. Ethan stood at the railing, looking out over the lake while the Sterling family talked about people and places he'd never heard of. He felt Vivian appear beside him before she spoke. You're doing well, she said quietly, her voice pitched for his ears only. Better than I expected, actually. Because I haven't embarrassed you yet? Because you're being yourself instead of trying too hard. She leaned against the railing, her shoulder almost touching his. My father respects that. He can smell desperation and pretense from a mile away. What does your mother think? She's reserving judgment, but she liked the bit about Mia and the children's hospital. That was smart, mentioning why you were there. Ethan glanced at her profile, illuminated by the soft light spilling from the house. I wasn't being smart. That's just the truth. Mia had pneumonia that turned into respiratory failure. Worst 3 weeks of my life, watching her on that ventilator, not knowing if she'd make it. Vivian turned to look at him fully, something unguarded flickering in her eyes. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. It's fine. Ethan cut her off before the conversation could get too real. Just remember that everything I told them tonight about Mia is true. I won't lie about my daughter, even for $10,000. I wouldn't ask you to, Vivian said, and she sounded like she meant it. Richard's voice carried across the terrace. Ethan, do you play chess? Ethan turned to find Vivian's father watching him with the kind of expression that suggested this was a test of some kind. I know the basics. My father taught me, but I'm not very good. Neither am I, Richard said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Come on, indulge an old man. Caroline's going to talk Vivian's ear off about wedding plans for her friend's daughter, and I could use the distraction. Vivian's Fontaine touched Ethan's arm briefly, a silent warning or encouragement, he wasn't sure which. Go ahead, I'll survive the wedding talk. The chessboard was set up in Richard's study, a room lined with law books and photos of a life lived according to plan. Richard poured them each a scotch from a crystal decanter, settling into a leather chair that probably cost more than Ethan's truck. The board sat between them, pieces arranged and waiting. White or black? Richard asked. You choose. Richard took white, opening with a standard king's pawn. Ethan matched with his own pawn, settling into the rhythm of a game he hadn't played since his father was alive. They played in silence for several moves. The only sound, the quiet click of pieces on wood, and the distant murmur of Caroline and Vivian's voices from somewhere in the house. "You seem like a decent man," Richard said finally, capturing one of Ethan's nights. "Straightforward, honest, not what I expected when Vivian said she was bringing someone." "What did you expect?" Ethan moved his bishop, seeing the trap Richard was setting 3 moves ahead. "Someone more like her, I suppose. Corporate, polished, the kind of man who'd understand her world." Richard studied the board, then looked up at Ethan with sharp eyes. "You're not that man." "No, sir, I'm not." Ethan met his gaze steadily. "But maybe that's not what she needs." "And what do you think she needs?" It was a loaded question, one that felt like it carried more weight than a chess game between strangers should hold. Ethan thought about Vivian in her office, reciting their fake relationship like a business proposal. He thought about the way her smile looked painted on during dinner and the brief moments when it had become real. "Honestly, I think she needs people who don't treat her success like a problem to be solved." Ethan moved his rook, blocking Richard's advance. "She's built something impressive, from what I can tell. Seems like that should be celebrated, not criticized." Richard's expression was unreadable as he captured Ethan's bishop. "You think I don't celebrate my daughter's accomplishments?" "I think you want her to be happy. I think you have a very specific idea of what that looks like. And I think Vivian's been trying to be 2 different people at once, the one you want and the one she actually is." Ethan paused, then added carefully, "That seems exhausting." For a long moment, Richard just looked at him. Then he laughed. A short, surprised sound. "You're blunt. I appreciate that, even when I don't particularly like what's being said." He moved his queen into position, a devastating play that Ethan saw too late. "But you're also not wrong. My wife and I have always wanted the best for Vivian. We pushed her to excel, to be ambitious, to never settle. And then when she became exactly what we taught her to be, we decided we didn't like that version after all." "Why?" Ethan asked, because they were already past pretense. "Because she's alone. Because she works 80-hour weeks and doesn't have time for anything else. Because when I look at my daughter, I see someone so focused on succeeding that she's forgotten how to live." Richard's voice carried genuine pain underneath the words. "We pushed her too hard, I think. Made her believe that her worth was tied to her achievements. And now she doesn't know how to stop achieving long enough to build a life outside that office." Ethan thought about Vivian hiring a fake boyfriend rather than showing up alone. About the tremor in her hand when she'd slid that check across the desk. About the weariness under her polished exterior. "Maybe she's building exactly the life she wants, and it just doesn't look like what you expected." "Maybe." Richard moved his final piece into place. "Checkmate." Ethan looked down at the board, seeing the inevitable conclusion he'd missed while focused on the wrong threats. "Well played. Your father taught you well. You lasted longer than most." Richard started resetting the pieces. "Another round?" They played 2 more games, falling into an easier rhythm. Richard won both times, but had to work for it. And by the 3rd game, they were talking about construction, about the housing market, about Richard's own experience building this lake house 20 years ago. It was comfortable in a way Ethan hadn't expected, this conversation with a man who should have been an adversary, but instead felt almost like an ally. When they finally returned to the main living area, they found Vivian and Caroline on the couch, looking at a photo album. Vivian glanced up as they entered, her expression somewhere between relief and apprehension. "Did Dad beat you terribly?" she asked Ethan. 3-0, Ethan admitted, "but I made him work for the last one." "That's better than I usually do," Vivian said with a small smile. "He's ruthless." "I prefer strategic," Richard said mildly, settling into his chair. "What are you 2 looking at?" "Just old photos," Caroline said, though the gleam in her eyes suggested this was another form of interrogation. "I was showing Ethan's, well, I suppose I should say I was showing our guest some pictures of Vivian growing up." "Mom," Vivian said, a warning in her voice. But Caroline was already turning the album toward Ethan, pointing to a photo of a serious-looking 10-year-old in a debate team uniform. She was always so focused, even as a child. Won the state championship 3 years running. Ethan looked at the photo, at young Vivian holding a trophy nearly as big as she was, her expression intense and unsmiling. "Let me guess. Didn't celebrate much, just moved on to the next competition? Vivian shot him a look that was half surprise, half something that looked almost grateful. How did you know? Because that's the face Mia makes when she wins something, already thinking about what's next instead of enjoying what she just accomplished. He met Vivian's eyes across the room. I'm trying to teach her it's okay to celebrate the wins, even small ones, that she doesn't have to earn love through achievement. The room went very quiet. Caroline closed the album slowly. Richard cleared his throat, and Vivian looked at Ethan with an expression he couldn't quite read, but that made something shift uncomfortably in his chest. That's very wise, Caroline said finally, her voice softer than it had been all evening. Perhaps we could all learn from that philosophy. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of polite conversation and carefully navigated questions. By the time Caroline declared she was heading to bed, Ethan felt like he'd run a marathon. His face hurt from holding careful expressions. His mind ached from tracking all the small lies they'd woven together, and he wanted nothing more than to collapse into sleep and stop pretending for a few hours. Vivian walked beside him up the stairs to their shared room, neither of them speaking until the door closed behind them. Then she sank onto her bed with a long exhale that sounded like she'd been holding her breath for hours. That wasn't terrible, she said to the ceiling. Your dad beat me at chess 3 times. He beats everyone. Don't take it personally. Vivian sat up, kicking off her shoes. You handled him well, though, and my mother actually liked you, which is unexpected. Because I'm not good enough for you? Ethan started unbuttoning his shirt, too tired to care about modesty. Because she doesn't like anyone I've ever brought home, which, granted, has only been 2 people in my entire life. But still. Vivian watched him for a moment, then looked away quickly. The thing you said about Mia and celebrating wins, did you mean that, or was that part of the performance? Ethan paused, shirt half open, considering the question. I meant it. Sarah used to tell me I was too hard on myself, that I needed to stop and appreciate things instead of always moving to the next crisis. I didn't listen well enough when she was alive, trying to do better for Mia. I'm sorry about your wife, Vivian said quietly. Marcus told me a little, but I didn't want to pry. How long were you married? 6 years. Together for 8. Ethan pulled off his shirt, reaching for the t-shirt he slept in. She was a teacher, smart, funny, patient with everyone except me when I was being stubborn, which was often. He smiled despite himself. She would have found this whole situation hilarious. Me pretending to date a millionaire CEO. She'd have had jokes for days. What happened? Vivian asked, then immediately looked horrified at herself. Sorry, that's none of my business. But Ethan found he didn't mind talking about it, not with someone who'd been honest about her own damage. Car accident. Black ice on a bridge she crossed every day on her way to school. Wrong place, wrong time, gone in an instant. He sat on his own bed, the 2 mattresses separated by 6 feet of expensive carpet that felt like miles. Mia was 4.5, old enough to understand Mommy wasn't coming home, not old enough to understand why. That's terrible, Vivian said, and she sounded like she actually meant it. Yeah. Ethan lay back, staring at the ceiling fan that rotated slowly above them. The first year was the worst. I barely functioned. Sarah's mom helped with Mia, my mom moved in for a while, and I just went through the motions. Work, home, sleep, repeat. Didn't feel real for a long time. And now? Now it's different. Still hard, but different. Mia needs me present, not just surviving, so I figured out how to be present. He turned his head to look at Vivian across the space between their beds. What about you? Ever been married? Vivian laughed, a short, bitter sound. No, came close once. His name was Michael. We met in business school, dated for 3 years, got engaged. She was quiet for a moment. He died 2 weeks before the wedding. Ethan sat up staring at her. Jesus, I'm sorry. Aneurysm, completely unexpected. He was 28, healthy, running a marathon 1 minute and gone the next. Vivian's voice was flat, reciting facts instead of feelings. That was 4 years ago. I threw myself into building the company after that. Easier to focus on things I could control than deal with things I couldn't. That why your parents worry? Part of it. They think I'm using work to avoid grief. They're not wrong, but they also don't get to tell me how to handle my own loss. She looked at him across the darkness. You get it, though. That need to just keep moving because if you stop, you'll fall apart. Yeah, Ethan said quietly. I get it. They lay there in the dark, two strangers who'd shared more truth in 10 minutes than they probably should have. Outside, the lake lapped quietly against the shore. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed midnight. And Ethan thought about how strange it was that he felt more comfortable with this woman he barely knew than he had with most people since Sarah died. Thank you, Vivian said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. For what? For being real tonight. For not just playing a part, but actually showing up as yourself. She paused. I know this is just a transaction for you, but it means something that you're taking it seriously. Ethan wanted to say that $10,000 was serious business, that anyone would take it seriously for that kind of money. But that felt too cynical for the strange intimacy of this moment. Instead, he said, Get some sleep. Something tells me tomorrow's going to be longer. He heard Vivian's soft laugh in the darkness. You have no idea. Morning came too early, announced by sunlight streaming through windows Ethan had forgotten to close. He woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of voices downstairs, disoriented for a moment before remembering where he was and why. Across the room, Vivian's bed was already empty, made with military precision. Ethan found her on the terrace, coffee in hand, looking out over the lake. She'd dressed in jeans and a soft blue sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back. She looked younger this way, less like a CEO and more like someone who might actually be dating a construction worker from Millbrook. Morning, he said, helping himself to coffee from the carafe on the table. How long have you been up? Since 6. Old habits. Vivian gestured to the view where early morning mist was burning off the water. I used to love this place when I was younger, before family gatherings became interrogations and every visit felt like a performance review. It's beautiful, Ethan admitted, settling into the chair beside her. Mia would love it. She's obsessed with fishing lately. Watched some YouTube video and decided she's going to catch a record-breaking bass. Vivian smiled, a real one that made her whole face soften. Has she caught anything yet? 3 bluegills and a sunfish she named Frederick before releasing him. Ethan sipped his coffee, which was predictably excellent. She cried when we had to let him go. Made me promise we'd come back and visit. Did you? Went back the next weekend. She sat on the dock for 2 hours calling for Frederick. I didn't have the heart to tell her all the sunfish looked the same. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to a photo of Mia holding her fishing rod, gap-toothed grin huge on her face. That's her. Vivian took the phone, studying the picture with unexpected focus. She has your eyes, and she looks fearless. She is, terrifyingly so. Ethan took the phone back, looking at his daughter's face. Sometimes I forget she's only 8. She's been through so much that she seems older. Then she does something like name a fish, and I remember she's still just a kid. You're a good father, Vivian said quietly. I can tell from the way you talk about her. Before Ethan could respond, Caroline appeared with a basket and a determined expression. Good morning, you two. I hope you're ready for an adventure. We're going to the farmer's market in town, and I won't take no for an answer. The farmer's market turned out to be less of a market and more of a social event where everyone knew Caroline Sterling and wanted to talk to her about charity functions and upcoming galas. Vivian fielded questions about her mystery boyfriend with practiced ease, introducing Ethan to what felt like half of Smith Mountain Lake's upper crust population. And this is Ethan, she'd say, her hand finding his with casual intimacy that almost felt real. Yes, we're very happy. No, we're not rushing anything. Yes, I'll let you know about the holidays. Ethan played his part, smiling at the right moments, answering questions about his work and his daughter, letting Vivian's world wash over him like a language he didn't quite speak. But there was one moment, standing at a produce stand while Vivian debated the merits of different apple varieties with a vendor, when he caught himself watching her with something that wasn't pretend. She was animated, laughing at something the vendor said. Her whole face lit up in a way he'd never seen in her office or at dinner last night. Her hair caught the morning sunlight, and she touched his arm to get his attention, and for just a second Ethan forgot this was an arrangement. For just a second she was simply someone he was getting to know, someone who made him feel something besides numb or overwhelmed for the first time in 3 years. Then the moment passed. Vivian paid for her apples, and they were moving on to the next stall. Back at the house, Richard announced he was going to fix the dock's water line, which had been leaking for weeks. Without thinking, Ethan said, "I can help with that." 20 minutes later, he was knee-deep in lake water, tools in hand, showing Richard how to properly seal the connection. It felt good to work with his hands, to solve a concrete problem instead of navigating emotional landmines. Richard worked beside him with surprising competence, taking direction without ego, asking intelligent questions about the repair. "You know what you're doing," Richard observed as Ethan tightened the final connection. "This is what I do, sir. Fix things, build things, make things work that stopped working." Ethan tested the seal, satisfied when nothing leaked. "Sometimes I think it's the only thing I'm actually good at." "I doubt that." Richard handed him a wrench. "You're good with my daughter. She seems more relaxed than I've seen her in years." Ethan looked up at the house, where, through the window, he could see Vivian helping her mother with something in the kitchen. Maybe she just needed permission to stop performing. Or maybe she needed someone who doesn't expect her to be perfect. Richard followed his gaze. "My wife and I, we set the bar high. Sometimes I wonder if we set it too high." They finished the repair in companionable silence. Then Richard said something that caught Ethan completely off guard. "Whatever happens with you two, I'm glad she met you. You're good for her, even if this doesn't last." Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and packed up the tools, carrying the weight of Richard's words like stones in his pocket. That night, after another elaborate dinner and more careful conversation, Ethan finally escaped to the room he shared with Vivian. He was exhausted from the constant performance, from monitoring every word and gesture, from pretending to be someone's boyfriend when he barely remembered how to be himself. He was sitting on his bed, checking his phone for messages from his mother about Mia, when his daughter's face filled the screen. She'd convinced his mother to let her video call. "Daddy!" Mia's voice burst through the speaker, making Ethan's chest ache with how much he missed her. "Guess what? Grandma let me help make cookies and I only burned one tray." "Only one? That's pretty good, baby girl." Ethan smiled despite his exhaustion. "What kind?" "Chocolate chip. We saved you some, but I can't promise they'll last until you get home." Mia's face scrunched up thoughtfully. "When are you coming home? I miss you." "Tomorrow evening. I miss you too, sweetheart. How's your breathing been?" "Good. I've been doing my treatments like you said. Grandma watches to make sure." Mia leaned closer to the camera. "Is your work thing going okay? Are you being safe?" "Very safe. Just meetings and boring adult stuff." Ethan heard footsteps behind him and glanced back to see Vivian standing in the doorway, frozen like she'd walked in on something private. He gestured for her to come in. "Hey Mia, there's someone I want you to say hi to." Vivian approached hesitantly, and Ethan angled the phone so they were both in frame. "Mia, this is my friend Vivian. Vivian, this is my daughter Mia." "Hi Mia," Vivian said softly, and Ethan heard something in her voice he'd never heard before. Nervousness. "Your dad's told me a lot about you. He says you're an amazing storyteller." Mia studied Vivian through the screen with the brutal honesty of 8-year-olds. "You're pretty. Are you Daddy's girlfriend?" Ethan felt his heart stop, but Vivian handled it with surprising grace. "We're friends. Good friends. Is that okay?" "I guess so." Mia tilted her head. "Do you like fishing? Because Daddy's not very good at it, but he tries really hard." Vivian laughed, a genuine sound that made her whole face change. "I haven't been fishing in years, but I'd like to try again sometime." They talked for a few more minutes before Mia's grandmother called her for bed. After she hung up, the room felt very quiet. Vivian sat on her own bed, hands folded in her lap, looking at Ethan with an expression he couldn't read. "She's wonderful," Vivian said finally. "Yeah, she is." Ethan set his phone aside. "Sorry if that was awkward. I didn't expect her to call." "Don't apologize. I'm glad I got to meet her, even virtually." Vivian was quiet for a moment. "She asked if I was your girlfriend." "Kids are direct like that. I hope it didn't make you uncomfortable." "No, I just—" Vivian trailed off, then seemed to gather herself. "I realized I've never really thought about what this looks like from the outside. We're lying to my parents, playing pretend for a weekend. But Mia, she's real. And if she thought this was real, and then it ended, it won't affect her," Ethan said firmly, "because we're not going to let it. This arrangement ends Monday morning. You drive me home, we part ways, And Mia never has to know this was anything more than me helping out a friend for the weekend. Right, of course. Vivian stood abruptly, heading toward the bathroom. I'm going to get ready for bed. She closed the door behind her, and Ethan sat in the quiet room wondering why doing the sensible thing suddenly felt like a mistake. Sunday morning arrived with rain drumming against the windows, turning the lake view gray and restless. Ethan woke to find Vivian already gone from her bed again, and when he made his way downstairs, he found the house strangely quiet. Caroline was in the kitchen arranging flowers with the focused intensity of someone trying not to think about something else. "Good morning, Ethan," she said, glancing up with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Coffee's fresh." Vivian went for a walk despite the rain. Richard's in his study nursing what I suspect is a headache from too much wine last night. Ethan poured himself coffee, sensing undercurrents he didn't understand. "Everything okay?" Caroline set down her pruning shears with deliberate care. "Can I ask you something? And I'd appreciate an honest answer." Every instinct Ethan had told him this was dangerous territory. "Of course. Are you in love with my daughter?" The question hit him like cold water. Ethan gripped his coffee mug, buying time while his brain scrambled for the right answer. The truth was, he barely knew Vivian Sterling. The lie was that this was a real relationship that might include love someday. Neither felt safe to say out loud. "I care about her," he said carefully. "She's brilliant and driven and more vulnerable than she lets anyone see. But love? That's not something I take lightly, Mrs. Sterling. I've been in love once. I know what it costs." Caroline studied him with a mother's precision. "That's not a yes. It's not a no either. It's honest." Ethan met her eyes steadily. "Your daughter hired me to pretend for a weekend. I know that. But somewhere along the way, the pretending started to feel less like work and more like something I didn't have a name for yet." He hadn't meant to say that last part. The words escaped before he could stop them, carrying more truth than he'd admitted even to himself. Caroline's expression softened into something that looked almost like sympathy. "She's been hurt before," Caroline said quietly. "Badly. After Michael died, she built walls so high, I'm not sure anyone could climb them. But watching her with you this weekend, she seems different, softer, like maybe those walls aren't quite as impenetrable as she thinks." "What happened to him?" Ethan asked. She mentioned an aneurysm, but not much else. Caroline turned back to her flowers, but her hands had stilled. They were 2 weeks from the wedding, everything planned, everyone invited. Michael went for his usual morning run and collapsed 3 blocks from their apartment. She found him when she went looking, wondering why he wasn't answering his phone. Caroline's voice caught. I'd never seen her cry before that day. Not when she broke her arm falling from a tree, not when she didn't get into her first choice college. Never. But at his funeral, she finally broke. And then she put herself back together so thoroughly that I'm not sure she's let herself feel anything since. Ethan thought about Vivian's flat voice when she told him about Michael, reciting facts instead of emotions. He thought about her throwing herself into building a company, using achievement to outrun grief. He understood that strategy better than he wanted to admit. Where did she go walking? He asked. There's a path that leads down to the boathouse. She used to spend hours there as a teenager when she needed to think. Caroline looked at him with sudden intensity. Go find her, Ethan. I think she needs someone who understands what it's like to lose everything and keep breathing anyway. The rain had softened to a drizzle by the time Ethan found the path Caroline had described. It wound through trees still clinging to their autumn colors, leaves plastered to the wet ground in patterns like stained glass. The boathouse sat at the end of a small dock, a structure that was probably charming in summer but looked lonely in the gray October light. Vivian sat on the edge of the dock, legs dangling over the water, soaked through despite the rain jacket she wore. She didn't turn when Ethan approached, but he saw her shoulders tense with awareness. Your mom's worried about you, Ethan said, settling down beside her. The dock was wet and cold, but he'd worked construction in worse conditions. My mom's always worried about me. It's her default state. Vivian's voice was rough, like she'd been crying, or maybe just breathing cold air too long. Did she send you to retrieve me? She suggested I might find you here. What I do about that is my own choice. Ethan looked out at the lake, gray water meeting gray sky in a line he couldn't quite distinguish. Want to talk about whatever's got you sitting in the rain? Not particularly. Want company while you don't talk about it? Vivian turned to look at him then, rain dripping from her hair, her expression somewhere between grateful and guarded. Why are you being nice to me? The weekend's almost over. You've earned your money. You don't have to keep pretending when no one's watching. Maybe I'm not pretending anymore, Ethan said, and felt the truth of it settle in his chest like a stone. Maybe somewhere between chess games with your dad and watching you negotiate apple prices like it was a corporate merger, I started actually giving a damn about whether you're okay. Vivian's laugh was sharp and bitter. You shouldn't. People who care about me tend to get hurt. Is that what happened with Michael? You cared about him and he got hurt? Her whole body went rigid. My mother told you. She's worried about you. She sees you building walls and shutting people out, and she doesn't know how to reach you. Ethan kept his voice gentle, the same tone he used with Mia when she was scared but trying to be brave. I know something about that. After Sarah died, I shut down for a year, went through the motions but didn't let myself feel anything because feeling meant acknowledging she was really gone. How did you get past it? Mia. Ethan smiled despite himself. She was 5 years old, and she looked at me one morning and said, Daddy, you're here, but you're not really here. Kids see things we think we're hiding. That broke something open in me. I realized I could keep being numb and miss watching my daughter grow up, or I could feel the pain and also feel everything else, joy, love, hope, all of it. Vivian was quiet for a long moment, watching the rain dimple the water's surface. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know how to do that. Feel the pain without it swallowing me whole. You don't have to do it alone, Ethan said. That's the thing I learned too late with Sarah. I thought I had to be strong enough to handle everything by myself. But strength isn't refusing help. It's knowing when to let people in. Well, like you're letting me in right now? Vivian asked, and there was something vulnerable in her eyes that made Ethan's chest ache. Yeah, like that. They sat in silence while the rain picked up again, soaking them both to the skin. Ethan knew they should go back to the house, change into dry clothes, maintain the performance for one more day. But something about this moment felt important, like they were balanced on the edge of something that would change if they moved too quickly. I loved him so much it scared me, Vivian said suddenly, her voice carrying over the sound of rain on water. Michael, we met during our first week of business school, and I knew immediately he was going to matter. We studied together, built our careers together, planned this whole future together, and then one morning he went for a run and never came back. I'm sorry, Ethan said, inadequate words for impossible loss. The worst part was the guilt. Vivian wrapped her arms around herself, shivering in the cold. We'd had a fight the night before, something stupid about wedding planning, whether to invite some distant relatives he didn't like. I was stressed about finals, and he was stressed about starting his new job, and we both said things we didn't mean. We went to bed angry. And in the morning, he kissed me before he left, and I pretended to be asleep because I was still mad about something that didn't even matter. Her voice broke on the last word, and Ethan saw tears mixing with rain on her face. That was the last time I saw him alive, and I didn't even kiss him back because I was too proud to let go of a stupid argument about people we barely knew. Vivian, everyone told me it wasn't my fault, that an aneurysm can happen to anyone, that there was nothing I could have done differently. But I keep thinking, what if that fight caused it? What if the stress triggered something? What if I just let it go, been kinder, kissed him back that morning? She turned to look at Ethan with raw anguish in her eyes. What if I killed him by being too stubborn to say I was sorry? Ethan understood then why she'd built those walls, why she threw herself into work with brutal intensity, why she'd hired a stranger to pretend to date her rather than risk something real. She'd been carrying this weight for 4 years, convinced that loving someone and being loved back had somehow led to death. Listen to me, he said firmly, reaching out to take her cold hands in his. You didn't kill him. Arguments don't cause aneurysms. Being human and imperfect and occasionally stubborn doesn't make you responsible for something that was always going to happen regardless of whether you kissed him goodbye that morning. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Because I've spent 3 years playing the same game with Sarah's death. Ethan squeezed her hands, willing her to hear him. I second-guessed everything. If I'd driven her to work that morning instead of letting her take her own car. If I'd insisted she take a different route. If I'd somehow known to tell her to stay home that day. But the truth is, Sometimes terrible things happen, and it's not anyone's fault. It's just random and cruel and unfair. How do you live with that? Vivian's voice was small, younger than he'd ever heard it. The randomness of it? By remembering the good parts, by holding on to what mattered instead of torturing myself with what-ifs. Ethan thought about Sarah's laugh, the way she'd dance in the kitchen while making breakfast, how she'd read Mia stories with different voices for every character. The last peaceful morning I had with Sarah, we woke up early because Mia had a nightmare. We all piled into bed together and Sarah told stories until Mia fell back asleep. We just lay there in the quiet, her head on my shoulder, and she whispered, "This is everything I ever wanted." That was 2 days before she died. Tears were streaming down Vivian's face now, unchecked and unguarded. That's beautiful. It is. And I could spend forever wishing I'd appreciated it more in the moment, or I can be grateful I have it to remember it all. Ethan brushed a strand of wet hair from her face without thinking. You got 4 years with Michael. 4 years of love and laughter and building a life together. Don't let one argument at the end erase all of that. Vivian leaned into him then, pressing her face against his shoulder while her whole body shook with sobs she'd apparently been holding back for years. Ethan wrapped his arms around her, anchoring her while she finally let herself break apart. The rain fell around them, cold and relentless, but he didn't move. Neither of them did. They sat there until the storm passed, until Vivian's tears quieted, until the sky began to lighten at the edges with the promise of clearing weather. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were red and puffy, mascara smudged, hair plastered to her face. She looked nothing like the polished CEO who'd cornered him in that Richmond office tower. She looked real and raw and more beautiful than Ethan had expected. "Thank you," she said hoarsely. "I didn't know I needed to say all that out loud until it came pouring out. Sometimes we don't know what we're carrying until someone else offers to help hold it," Ethan said. He stood, offering her his hand. "Come on, let's get you inside before you catch pneumonia." Vivian let him pull her to her feet, but she didn't let go of his hand as they walked back up the path toward the house. Their fingers stayed intertwined, cold and wet, and somehow fitting together like they'd done this 1,000 times before. It felt dangerous and right in equal measure. Caroline was waiting with towels and hot tea and enough maternal fussing to make Vivian smile despite her tear-swollen eyes. She sent them both upstairs to change, and Ethan was grateful for the privacy of their shared room for a moment to process what had just happened on that dock. He'd gone looking for Vivian, expecting to offer basic comfort and maybe convince her to come inside. Instead, he'd shared pieces of himself he rarely spoke about, seen her vulnerability laid bare, and felt something shift between them that he couldn't name and wasn't sure he wanted to. When Vivian emerged from the bathroom in dry clothes, her hair damp and loose around her shoulders, she looked at him with an expression that made his pulse kick up. "What you said down there," she started, then seemed to struggle with the words. "About not pretending anymore. Did you mean that?" Ethan should have deflected, should have made it light, or claimed it was part of maintaining their cover story. Instead, he heard himself say, "Yeah, I meant it." "I don't know what to do with that," Vivian admitted, vulnerability still written across her face. "This was supposed to be simple. A transaction. You show up, play a part, collect your money, and we both move on." "I know what it was supposed to be," Ethan said, "but I also know what it's becoming, at least for me. And I think you feel it too, or you wouldn't be asking." Vivian crossed the room slowly, stopping just close enough that he could smell the rain still clinging to her hair, could see the pulse beating in her throat. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I'm so scared of letting someone matter again, of building something that could be taken away in an instant. I don't know if I'm strong enough to survive that twice." "You're stronger than you think," Ethan said, lifting his hand to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a tear he'd missed. "But you're right to be scared. Caring about someone is terrifying, especially when you've lost someone before and you know exactly how much it can hurt. So what do we do?" Ethan didn't have an answer for that. He was a 34-year-old single father who fixed houses for a living and could barely afford his daughter's medication. Vivian was a self-made millionaire who lived in a world of corporate acquisitions and charity galas. The gap between their lives was wider than the lake outside this window. And yet, standing here in this moment, none of that seemed to matter as much as the look in her eyes. "I think we stop pretending," he said finally. At least with each other. Whatever this is, whatever it might become, we face it honestly instead of hiding behind the arrangement we made. And tomorrow? Vivian asked. When the weekend ends and you go back to your life? Tomorrow we figure out if there's any way to bridge the distance between your world and mine. Ethan let his hand fall from her face, stepping back to give her space. But right now, your family is downstairs probably wondering what's taking us so long. We should go be social for a few more hours. Vivian nodded, but she caught his hand as he moved toward the door. Ethan, what you told me about Sarah about that last morning, that's not something you share lightly. Why tell me? Because you needed to hear it, and because I'm tired of carrying it alone. He squeezed her hand once before letting go. Come on, let's go face the Sterling family one more time. The rest of Sunday passed in a strange, suspended atmosphere. The rain cleared by afternoon, leaving everything washed clean and sparkling. Richard suggested a walk around the property, and they all went together, Caroline linking her arm through Vivian's, Richard pointing out improvements he'd made over the years. Ethan walked beside them, feeling like both an insider and an intruder, watching the careful dance of a family trying to understand each other across years of accumulated hurt. At dinner, the conversation was gentler than it had been the previous nights. Caroline asked about Mia's school and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. Richard told stories about Vivian's childhood that made her laugh and protest in equal measure. And Vivian herself seemed lighter somehow, like crying out her grief on that Doc had released something she'd been holding too tightly. After dinner, while Caroline was showing Vivian something on her phone and laughing about a mutual friend's social media mishap, Richard pulled Ethan aside into the study. Something happened today, Richard said without preamble. I don't know what, but my daughter came back from that walk looking like she'd been crying, and you came back looking like you'd been the one she cried to. Ethan chose his words carefully. She needed to talk. I listened. About Michael? Among other things. Richard poured them both scotch without asking, settling into his chair with the weariness of a man who'd fought battles he couldn't win. Caroline and I have tried for 4 years to get her to talk about it. She just shut us out, threw herself into her work, and built walls we couldn't scale. What did you do differently? I didn't try to fix her, Ethan said simply. I just told her she wasn't alone in carrying grief. Sometimes that's all someone needs to hear. Richard studied him over his glass, and Ethan saw the moment the older man made a decision about something. I misjudged you when Vivian said she was bringing someone. I assumed you'd be another corporate type. Someone who saw my daughter as a prize to be won or a connection to be exploited. But you're not that. No, sir. I'm just a guy who knows what it's like to lose someone and keep going because you don't have another choice. Be good to her, Richard said quietly. If this thing between you is real, and I think it might be despite whatever you're both telling yourselves, be good to her. She deserves someone who sees her as a person instead of an achievement. Ethan wanted to say that nothing was certain, that they barely knew each other, that the complications were too vast to navigate easily. But Richard was looking at him with something like hope in his eyes, and Ethan found he couldn't crush that with cold practicality. I'll do my best, he said instead, and meant it more than he probably should have. That night, after Caroline and Richard had gone to bed, Ethan found himself back in the room he shared with Vivian, hyper-aware of every sound and movement. They'd maintained careful distance all evening, but now, alone in the quiet, the air between them felt charged with everything unsaid. One more morning and this is over, Vivian said, standing at the window looking out at the lake, now calm and moonlit. We drive back to Richmond, you go home to Mia, and I go back to my office. Everything returns to normal. Is that what you want? Ethan asked. Vivian turned to face him, backlit by moonlight, her expression hidden in shadow. I don't know what I want anymore. Yesterday I wanted to get through this weekend without embarrassing myself. Today I want things I have no business wanting. Like what? Like more time with you. Like the chance to see if this feeling is real or just the product of an intense weekend playing pretend. She moved closer, and now he could see her face, see the conflict written there. Like finding out what it would be like to kiss you without an audience watching and judging. Ethan's heart kicked hard against his ribs. Vivian. I know, it's a bad idea. We're from different worlds. You have a daughter to think about. I have a company to run. There are 1,000 reasons why this shouldn't happen. She stopped just in front of him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her, smell the subtle scent of her shampoo. But I can't stop thinking about it anyway. Every rational thought in Ethan's head told him to step back, to maintain the boundaries they'd established, to remember that this was supposed to be a simple business arrangement. But standing here in the moonlight with Vivian looking at him like he was something she wanted instead of something she'd hired, rationality felt like a distant concern. "If we do this," he said quietly, "it changes everything. We can't go back to pretending it was just an arrangement." "I know. And I don't know how we make it work. The distance, the differences in our lives, all of it. I know that too. So why risk it?" Vivian reached up, her hand settling against his chest where his heart was beating too fast. "Because I'm tired of being afraid. Because you made me feel something today that I haven't felt in 4 years. Like maybe it's possible to let someone in without losing myself completely. Because when I think about getting in that car tomorrow and driving away from you forever, something in me screams that it's wrong." Ethan covered her hand with his, holding it against his chest. "I've got a daughter who's already lost one person she loved. If we start something and it falls apart, it doesn't just hurt us, it hurts her too." "Then we don't let it fall apart," Vivian said, with the same fierce determination she probably brought to her business deals. "We figure it out. We work through the complications. We try. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, but maybe it doesn't have to be as complicated as we're making it." She took a breath, steadying herself. "Ask me to stay. Not because you're being paid to pretend, because you want me to." Ethan looked at her in the moonlight, this complicated, brilliant, broken woman who'd hired him to play pretend and somehow become the first person since Sarah who made him want to take the risk of feeling again. He thought about Mia asking if Vivian was his girlfriend, about the weight of potential disappointment if this didn't work. He thought about all the reasons to say no. Then he thought about sitting on that dock, watching Vivian finally let herself cry, feeling something unlock in his own chest that he'd kept sealed since Sarah died. "Stay," he said softly. "Not as part of our arrangement. Stay because I want to see where this goes. Because the thought of not seeing you again makes me realize how much I've gotten used to having you around." Vivian's smile was tremulous and real, the kind of smile that transformed her whole face. "Yeah?" "Yeah." She kissed him then, rising onto her toes to press her lips to his with a gentleness that made his chest ache. It wasn't the practiced kiss of their lakeside performance for her parents. It was uncertain and searching, a question being asked and answered at the same time. Ethan cupped her face in his hands, kissing her back with 4 years of loneliness and loss, and the terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, he could have this again. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Vivian rested her forehead against his. "This is crazy." "Completely," Ethan agreed. "We're going to have to figure out logistics, and tell your mother, and introduce me to Mia properly." She was making lists even now, her mind already working through the complications. "And my parents are going to have opinions, and your life is in Millbrook while mine is in Richmond, and—" Ethan kissed her again, cutting off the spiral of practical concerns. When he pulled back, he said, "How about we just focus on right now? Tomorrow we'll start figuring out the rest. Tonight, let's just be two people who decided to take a chance on something that scares them." Vivian nodded against him, her arms wrapping around his waist, holding on like he was something solid in a world that had proven unpredictable. They stood like that for a long time, moonlight streaming through the window, the lake quiet beyond the glass. Two people who'd been hired to fake a relationship, discovering that somewhere along the way, it had become startlingly, terrifyingly real. Monday morning came too fast and not fast enough. Ethan woke to find Vivian already awake, watching him from her own bed with an expression he couldn't quite read. The early light made her look softer, younger, and when she smiled at him, it felt like something private and precious. "We should talk about what happens next," she said quietly, pulling her knees up to her chest. "Before we go downstairs and face my parents and drive back to reality." Ethan sat up, running a hand through his hair. "What do you want to happen?" "I want to see you again. Actually see you, not as part of some arrangement." Vivian's fingers worried at the edge of her blanket. "But I also don't want to rush into something that affects Mia. She's already been through so much. If we're going to do this, we need to be sure." "Agreed." Ethan thought about his daughter, about how she'd looked at Vivian through the phone screen with cautious curiosity. How about we take it slow? See each other when we can, figure out if this thing between us works outside the bubble of this weekend. Slow sounds good, Vivian said, though something in her voice suggested she wasn't used to taking anything slowly. I have meetings all week, but maybe next weekend? You could bring Mia to Richmond. We could do something fun, low pressure. Let her get to know me without any expectations. Before Ethan could respond, his phone rang. The screen showed his mother's number and his stomach dropped. She wouldn't call this early unless something was wrong. Mom? He answered, already swinging his legs out of bed. What's wrong? Ethan, don't panic, but Mia had an attack last night. His mother's voice was strained, trying for calm and missing by miles. Her breathing got bad around midnight. I gave her the nebulizer treatment like you showed me, but it wasn't helping. I called an ambulance. We're at Richmond Community now. But the world narrowed to a pinpoint. Ethan was already moving, grabbing his bag, his hand shaking as he tried to process what she was saying. How is she? Is she okay? She's stable now. They've got her on oxygen and steroids. The doctor wants to keep her for observation, maybe 24 hours. His mother's voice cracked. I'm so sorry, honey. I didn't know what else to do. You did exactly right. I'm leaving now. I'll be there in 2 hours. Ethan was pulling on clothes, barely aware of Vivian standing up, watching him with alarm. Tell Mia I'm coming. Tell her I love her and I'm coming right now. He hung up and finished dressing with mechanical efficiency, his mind already racing ahead to the hospital, to his daughter struggling to breathe, to the bills this would add to the pile he couldn't already pay. Vivian appeared beside him, already dressed, her car keys in hand. I'm driving, she said, no room for argument in her voice. You're in no state to be behind a wheel, and my car is faster. We'll be there in 90 minutes. Vivian, you don't have to. She's 8 years old and she's in the hospital. Of course I have to. Vivian grabbed his bag along with her own. Come on, we'll explain to my parents on the way out. The conversation with Caroline and Richard was a blur. Ethan registered concern, offers of help, Caroline pressing something into his hand that turned out to be her personal cell number. Then they were in Vivian's Mercedes, racing down the mountain road faster than was probably legal, the lake disappearing behind them. Ethan called his mother back, got more details. Mia had woken up wheezing, couldn't catch her breath, had been terrified. The paramedics were kind, his mother said. They'd let her ride in the ambulance, hold Mia's hand while they worked. By the time they got to the ER, Mia's oxygen levels were dangerously low. She kept asking for you, his mother said softly. I told her you were coming home today anyway, that you'd be there soon as you could. Ethan pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes, fighting back the panic that wanted to overwhelm him. Vivian's hand found his, squeezing once before returning to the wheel. She drove with focused intensity, weaving through traffic with the kind of calculated aggression that probably should have scared him, but instead felt reassuring. Tell me about her asthma, Vivian said, her voice cutting through his spiraling thoughts. When did it start? After Sarah died. The doctor said trauma can trigger it sometimes, especially in kids. Ethan forced himself to focus on the facts, the medical history he'd recited too many times to insurance companies and emergency room staff. She has attacks triggered by exercise, cold air, stress. Usually the rescue inhaler works. Sometimes we need the nebulizer. This is only the 3rd time we've had to go to the ER. What's her medication regimen? Daily controller inhaler, rescue inhaler as needed, nebulizer at home for emergencies. We've tried different medications, but her insurance won't cover the newer, better ones. Too expensive. The bitterness in his voice surprised him. So we make do with older drugs that don't work quite as well. Vivian's jaw tightened, but she didn't say anything. She just drove faster. They made it to Richmond Community Hospital in 87 minutes. Vivian pulled up to the emergency entrance, ignoring the no parking signs, and followed Ethan inside without being asked. He barely registered her presence, his entire focus on the receptionist, on getting to his daughter. His mother met them outside Mia's room, looking exhausted and relieved in equal measure. She's sleeping. They gave her something to help her rest after the breathing treatment. Her oxygen is better, but they want to monitor her. Ethan didn't wait for permission. He pushed into the room and his heart broke at the sight of his little girl hooked up to monitors, oxygen cannula in her nose, looking impossibly small in the hospital bed. Her face was pale, dark circles under her eyes, but her breathing looked easier than his mother had described. He sank into the chair beside her bed, taking her small hand in his. "Hey, baby girl," he whispered, even though she was sleeping. "Daddy's here now. You're going to be okay." Behind him, he heard Vivian talking quietly with his mother, introducing herself, explaining their early return. His mother's surprised tone barely registered. All that mattered was Mia, breathing steady and even, alive and safe, even if she was hooked up to machines he hated. Mia stirred after a few minutes, her eyes fluttering open. When she saw him, her face crumpled and tears started flowing. "Daddy, I couldn't breathe. I was so scared." "I know, sweetheart. I know." Ethan gathered her as close as the wires and tubes would allow, pressing his face into her hair. "But you're okay now. The doctors are taking good care of you." "Grandma called the ambulance. There were so many people and bright lights and I couldn't breathe and—" Mia was working herself up, her breathing starting to hitch. "Shh, it's okay. Slow breaths, remember, like we practiced." Ethan rubbed her back in slow circles, the motion as familiar as his own heartbeat. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. That's it. You're doing so good." Mia's breathing gradually steadied, though she kept her face pressed against his chest. "I want to go home." "Tomorrow, probably. The doctors want to make sure you're all better first." Ethan smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "But I'm not going anywhere. I'll stay right here with you." "Promise?" "Promise." It was only then that Mia seemed to notice Vivian standing uncertainly near the door. Her eyes widened slightly. "Your daddy's friend. From the phone." Vivian stepped closer, her usual confidence replaced by careful gentleness. "That's right. I'm Vivian. Your dad and I were together when your grandma called, so I drove him here. I hope that's okay." Mia studied her with the blunt assessment of children, then nodded. "You said you'd go fishing with me sometime." "I did say that," Vivian agreed, smiling, "and I meant it. But right now, you need to rest and get better." "Will you stay too?" Mia asked, the question so simple and trusting that Ethan saw Vivian's composure crack slightly. "If your dad says it's okay, I'll stay for a while," Vivian said, looking to Ethan for permission. Ethan nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. His mother excused herself to get coffee, leaving the three of them in the small hospital room. Vivian settled into a chair on the other side of Mia's bed, and for the next hour she entertained his daughter with stories about growing up on the lake, about the time she'd fallen out of a canoe trying to catch a fish with her bare hands, about the summer she'd convinced herself she could build a treehouse and ended up needing 17 stitches. Mia laughed in all the right places, her color slowly returning, and Ethan watched Vivian transform into someone he'd never seen before. Not the polished CEO, not the grief-stricken woman on the dock, but someone warm and funny and completely present for a scared 8-year-old who needed distraction from hospital monitors and oxygen tubes. When Mia finally drifted back to sleep, Vivian stood quietly. "I should go, let you both rest." Ethan followed her into the hallway, suddenly aware that she'd driven him here, stayed for hours, and now had no way back to her own car still parked at her parents' lake house. "Vivian, I don't know how to thank you." "Don't." She cut him off gently. "You don't thank someone for showing up when it matters. That's just what you do." She glanced back at the room where Mia slept. "She's wonderful, Ethan. Brave and funny, and so much like you." "She liked you," Ethan said, and felt the weight of what that meant. "She doesn't warm up to people easily, not since Sarah." "I liked her too." Vivian's smile was soft and genuine. "Look, I need to get back to Richmond, deal with some work emergencies I've been ignoring. But call me later, let me know how she's doing." Ethan pulled her into a hug, right there in the hospital corridor, not caring who saw. "Thank you for driving, for staying, for all of it." Vivian held him tight for a moment before pulling back. "I'll arrange for a car service to take me back to the lake. Don't worry about logistics, just take care of your daughter." She left with one last look at Mia's room, and Ethan returned to his daughter's bedside, settling in for what he knew would be a long night of monitoring and waiting. The next 2 days blurred together in the familiar rhythm of hospital time. Mia improved steadily, her oxygen levels returning to normal, her breathing easier. The doctors adjusted her medications, recommended a specialist consultation, and finally cleared her for discharge with stern instructions about follow-up care. The bill came to just under $4,000, even with insurance. Ethan stared at the number and felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders alongside everything else he owed. The $10,000 from Vivian would cover Mia's immediate medical needs, but it wouldn't last long at this rate. He was packing up Mia's things Wednesday afternoon when his phone rang. Vivian's name flashed on the screen, and something in his chest eased just seeing it. "Hey," he answered, stepping into the hallway for privacy. "We're being discharged in about an hour." "That's great news. How's she doing?" "Much better. Scared, but trying to be brave about it." Ethan leaned against the wall, exhaustion catching up with him now that the crisis was passing. "They want her to see a pulmonologist, adjust her treatment plan. But she's okay." "Good." Vivian paused, and he heard papers rustling in the background. "Listen, I have something I need to tell you. Don't be angry." Ethan's stomach dropped. "What did you do?" "I called in a favor with a friend who runs a pharmaceutical consulting firm. Had him review Mia's medical records. With your mother's permission, I got her number from you. She emailed them over. Anyway, there's a newer medication that would work better for Mia's type of asthma. It's expensive, but I made some calls, and I can get it covered through a compassionate use program I helped fund last year. Vivian, before you tell me no, before you say anything about pride or charity, just listen. This isn't about money. This is about a little girl who shouldn't have to use inferior medication because insurance companies are run by people with no souls. I have the resources and the connections to help. Let me use them." Ethan closed his eyes, torn between gratitude and the bone-deep instinct that he should be able to provide for his daughter without accepting help from the woman he'd just started dating. "I can't let you pay for my daughter's medication." "I'm not paying for it. I'm making a phone call that connects her to a program that already exists. That's it." Vivian's voice softened. "Ethan, I know you want to handle everything yourself. I understand that instinct. But sometimes accepting help isn't weakness. It's being smart enough to prioritize what matters most. Which is? Mia being healthy and happy. Everything else is just ego." She wasn't wrong, which made it harder. Ethan thought about his daughter's terrified face as she struggled to breathe, about the inadequate medications they'd been using because that's all he could afford. He thought about what Sarah would tell him to do, and knew she'd call him an idiot for letting pride get in the way of their daughter's health. "Okay," he said finally. "Thank you, but I'm keeping track, and someday I'm going to find a way to pay you back." "You already did. You gave me a weekend where I felt like myself again instead of the person my parents wanted me to be. That's worth more than medication." Vivian hesitated, then added, "I miss you." "Is that weird to say after only knowing each other a week?" "If it is, we're both weird. I miss you too." Ethan smiled despite his exhaustion. "When can I see you?" "I'm buried in work this week. Remember that acquisition I mentioned? It's heating up and getting complicated. But this weekend, if Mia's feeling better, maybe you both could come to Richmond. We could do something fun. The Science Museum maybe, or the zoo?" "She'd love that," Ethan said, meaning it. "I'll talk to her, see how she's feeling." They talked for a few more minutes before Vivian had to go, and Ethan returned to Mia's room feeling lighter than he had in days. His mother looked up from the book she was reading to Mia, her expression knowing. "That was Vivian, wasn't it?" she asked. Ethan nodded, and his mother smiled. "She's good for you. I can hear it in your voice. You sound happy." "It's complicated, Mom. We're from completely different worlds." "Love usually is complicated," his mother said simply, "but that doesn't make it wrong." Saturday arrived with perfect autumn weather, and Mia feeling well enough to be excited about their Richmond adventure. Ethan had spent the week in a state of nervous anticipation, second-guessing every aspect of this plan. What if Mia didn't actually like Vivian once she got to know her? What if Vivian realized that dating a single father meant chaos and responsibility and very little spontaneity? What if this whole thing was a mistake born from an intense weekend that wouldn't survive contact with real life? But when Vivian met them at the Science Museum entrance, wearing jeans and a sweater that made her look approachable instead of corporate, Mia's face lit up with genuine excitement. "You came!" "Of course I came. I promised, didn't I?" Vivian crouched down to Mia's level. "I heard you've been feeling much better." "The new medicine works really good," Mia said solemnly. "Daddy says you helped get it for me." "Thank you." Something crossed Vivian's face. surprise maybe, or emotion she wasn't expecting. "You're very welcome. Now, I haven't been to this museum in years. You'll have to show me all the best exhibits." Mia took Vivian's hand with the easy trust of children who'd decided someone was safe, and Ethan followed them inside, watching his daughter and his girlfriend navigate a relationship that mattered more than any business deal or medical crisis. The afternoon passed in a blur of interactive exhibits and planetarium shows. Vivian threw herself into it with unexpected enthusiasm, building structures in the engineering section, making Mia giggle during the electricity demonstration, asking questions that showed she was actually interested instead of just going through the motions. And Mia bloomed under the attention, showing off her knowledge, telling stories, being the bright, funny kid she'd always been before grief and illness had dimmed some of her light. They were in the dinosaur exhibit when Mia suddenly asked, "Are you going to be my daddy's girlfriend for real? Not just for pretend?" Ethan froze, but Vivian handled it with grace. "What makes you think we were pretending?" "I heard Daddy tell Grandma it was complicated. Adults only say that when they're not sure about stuff." Mia looked between them with 8-year-old wisdom. "But I think you like each other. Like really like each other." "You're right," Vivian said, glancing at Ethan before continuing. "We do really like each other. And yes, I'm your dad's girlfriend for real. Is that okay with you?" Mia considered this seriously. "Will you leave like Mommy did?" The question hit like a physical blow. Ethan started to intervene, but Vivian spoke first, her voice gentle but firm. "Your mommy didn't want to leave. She loved you so much, and what happened to her wasn't fair or right. I can't promise that nothing bad will ever happen, because life is unpredictable. But I can promise that I'm not going anywhere on purpose. If I'm part of your life, I'm in it for real." Mia studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, but you have to come fishing with us. You promised." "Deal," Vivian said, and Ethan saw her blink back tears as Mia hugged her. They had dinner at a family restaurant Mia loved, the kind of place with crayons on the table and a kid's menu shaped like a dinosaur. Vivian ate chicken fingers and French fries without complaint, colored a picture of a castle with Mia, and looked more relaxed than Ethan had ever seen her. This was the woman behind the CEO facade, he realized. The person she might have been if life hadn't taught her to build walls. Later, after Mia fell asleep in the back seat during the drive home, Vivian pulled over at a rest stop. They stood in the parking lot under stars that were just starting to appear, and Ethan pulled her into his arms. "Today was perfect," he said against her hair. "Thank you for being so good with her." "She makes it easy. She's incredible, Ethan." Vivian pulled back to look at him. "But I meant what I said. If we're doing this, I'm all in. That means being part of both your lives, not just the convenient parts." "I know. And I'm all in too." Ethan kissed her forehead. "Even though I still have no idea how we make this work practically. You're in Richmond running a company. I'm in Millbrook raising a kid and working construction. The logistics alone, we'll figure it out," Vivian interrupted. "People manage long-distance relationships all the time. It's 45 minutes, not the moon. I can come to Millbrook. You can come to Richmond. We'll make time." Ethan wanted to believe it was that simple, but he'd seen enough of life to know that good intentions didn't always survive reality. The following week, reality arrived with a vengeance. Vivian's acquisition deal hit complications she'd been worried about. The target company's owner was threatening to back out, there were regulatory issues, and suddenly she was working 18-hour days trying to salvage months of negotiations. She called when she could, texted apologies for missed dinners, and Ethan understood. He did. But understanding didn't make it easier to explain to Mia why Vivian couldn't come to her school play, or why their planned weekend together got canceled at the last minute. Then Morrison cut Ethan's hours, citing slow business, and suddenly the financial pressure was back with crushing weight. The $10,000 from Vivian had covered Mia's immediate medical expenses, but there were still bills, still the roof that needed fixing, still the constant math of survival that didn't care about new relationships or cautious hope. Ethan was looking at his bank balance, trying to figure out how to make $200 stretch until next payday, when Vivian called. It was late, past 10, and she sounded exhausted. "I'm sorry I haven't called earlier. It's been absolutely insane here." He heard papers rustling, the sound of her pacing. "The deal is falling apart. The owner is being unreasonable, threatening to sell to someone else out of spite, and I'm this close to walking away from the whole thing." "Maybe you should," Ethan said, trying to be supportive even though he was juggling his own crisis. If it's this much trouble, maybe it's not meant to happen. I've put 6 months into this. Walking away means admitting defeat, and I don't do that. Her voice had an edge he recognized, the CEO taking charge, not the woman who'd colored dinosaurs with his daughter. I just need to find the right leverage, the right angle. Vivian, you sound exhausted. Maybe you should go home, get some sleep, come at it fresh tomorrow. I can't. There's too much to do. She sighed, and he heard the weight of it. I'm sorry. I know I promised we'd figure this out, make time, but right now you're drowning in work, and I'm drowning in bills, and we're both too tired to figure out how to bridge the gap, Ethan finished. I get it. I do. But Mia asked me today when you're coming to visit again, and I didn't know what to tell her. Silence on the other end of the line, heavy and loaded. Then, I'm trying, Ethan. I really am. But I can't just abandon my company because we're dating. This is my life, my career, everything I've built. I'm not asking you to abandon anything. I'm just asking you to remember that you're not just dating me. You said you were part of both our lives. But Mia doesn't understand why someone who's part of her life keeps not showing up. That's not fair, Vivian said, her voice sharp now. I've known her for 2 weeks. You can't expect me to completely rearrange my life around a child I barely know. The words hung between them, harsh and true, and more honest than either of them had been willing to be. Ethan felt something crack in his chest, the hope he'd been carefully nurturing starting to splinter. You're right, he said quietly. That's not fair. And maybe that's the problem. Maybe we moved too fast, assumed we could make this work without really thinking through what it would cost. Ethan, I need to go. Mia has school tomorrow, and I need to figure out which bill to pay late this month. He rubbed his eyes, exhaustion making everything harder. Call me when you have time. Really have time, not just 5 minutes between meetings. He hung up before she could respond, hating himself for the way the conversation had ended, but also knowing they'd finally said out loud what they'd both been thinking. This was hard. Maybe too hard. 3 days passed without contact. Ethan focused on Mia, on work, on the familiar routine of survival. He told himself it was better this way, that they'd been fooling themselves thinking a weekend of playing house could translate into a real relationship. But he missed Vivian with an ache that surprised him, missed her voice and her laugh, and the way she looked at him like he was someone worth knowing. Thursday evening, he was making dinner when someone knocked on his door. He opened it to find Vivian standing on his porch, still in her work clothes, looking rumpled and uncertain in a way he'd never seen. Hi, she said simply. Can I come in? Ethan stepped aside, letting her enter his small rental house with its worn furniture and water-stained ceiling. He watched her take in his life. The mismatched dishes, the photos of Sarah still on the walls, Mia's drawings covering the refrigerator. This was his world, so far removed from her penthouse and her boardrooms. Where's Mia? Vivian asked. At my mom's. Thursday is their dinner night. Ethan crossed his arms, defensive without meaning to be. What are you doing here, Vivian? I walked away from the deal, she said, told the owner to take his company and his unreasonable demands and find someone else. My team thought I was crazy. My lawyers are still calling, trying to talk me out of it. She laughed, a slightly unhinged sound. 6 months of work, millions of dollars at stake, and I just walked away. Why? Because I was sitting in a conference room at midnight, listening to lawyers argue about liability clauses, and I realized I was choosing this over you, over Mia, over the chance at having something real instead of just successful. Vivian moved closer, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I'm sorry I said what I said on the phone. You were right. I made promises about being part of your lives and then let work take priority. That's what I always do. I prioritize achievement over people because achievement can't leave me. Vivian, let me finish. She took a shaky breath. When Michael died, I decided never to put myself in a position to be hurt like that again. So I built a company instead of a life. I surrounded myself with deals and acquisitions and things I could control. And then you came along and reminded me what it felt like to actually want something more than the next achievement on my resume. Ethan wanted to stay angry, wanted to protect himself from the inevitable hurt of letting her in fully, but looking at her standing in his kitchen, having driven 45 minutes after walking away from a major deal just to have this conversation, he couldn't hold on to his defenses. I'm scared too. he admitted, of letting you matter this much, of Mia getting attached and then losing someone else she loves, of not being enough for someone like you, someone brilliant and successful and used to a life I can't provide. You think I care about that? Vivian's voice broke. About money or lifestyle or any of that? Ethan, I spent the worst 3 days of my life this week not talking to you, and I kept thinking, what's the point of being successful if I'm too afraid to actually live? She closed the distance between them, taking his hands in hers. I don't need you to provide some fancy lifestyle. I need you to be exactly who you are. A good father, an honest man, someone who sees past the CEO armor to the person underneath. That's what I can't find anywhere else. Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, while she finally let herself cry against his chest. They stood there in his small kitchen with its chipped counters and flickering light. Two broken people who'd found each other in the least likely way and were trying to figure out how to build something whole. We're going to fight sometimes, he said into her hair, about priorities and time and all the complicated logistics of merging our lives. I know. And there will be moments when this feels impossible, when the distance and the differences feel too big to overcome. I know that too. But I want to try anyway, Ethan said, pulling back to look at her. If you're willing to actually show up, to make us a priority sometimes instead of just another item on your schedule, I want to try making this work. Vivian nodded, her smile tremulous but real. I'm willing. I'm terrified, but I'm willing. He kissed her then, slow and deep, tasting salt from her tears and coffee from what had probably been a very long day. When they finally broke apart, Vivian rested her forehead against his. I should probably go, she said reluctantly. Let you pick up Mia? Get back to your evening routine. Or, Ethan said, surprising himself, you could stay, have dinner with us. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and whatever vegetable I can convince Mia to eat, but stay. Vivian's smile transformed her whole face. Yeah? Yeah. If we're doing this, might as well start doing it for real. He grabbed his phone to text his mother he was picking up Mia, then looked back at Vivian. Fair warning, she's going to ask you a million questions and probably try to talk you into reading her at least 3 bedtime stories. I can handle that, Vivian said, and this time when she smiled, it reached all the way to her eyes. Mia's reaction when she saw Vivian sitting at their kitchen table was pure, unfiltered joy. She launched herself at Vivian with the force of a small hurricane, nearly knocking her off the chair. You came! You actually came! Mia pulled back, her face serious. Are you staying for dinner? Can you read me stories tonight? Do you want to see the drawing I made of you? Vivian laughed, catching Ethan's eye over Mia's head with an expression that said she was completely overwhelmed and completely happy at the same time. Yes to all of those things, and I definitely want to see that drawing. Dinner was chaotic in the best way. Mia talked nonstop, telling Vivian about school and her friends and the science project she was planning about weather patterns. Vivian listened with genuine interest, asked questions that showed she was actually paying attention, and didn't even flinch when Mia accidentally spilled juice across the table. She just grabbed paper towels and helped clean up like it was the most natural thing in the world. After dinner, while Ethan did dishes, he heard Vivian and Mia in the living room. Mia was showing off her drawing, a stick figure family with 3 people and what appeared to be a very large dog. That's you and Daddy and me, Mia explained, and that's the dog I want to get. Daddy says maybe someday. It's beautiful, Vivian said, and Ethan heard the emotion in her voice. Can I keep this? Really? You want to keep my drawing? Really? I'll hang it in my office so I can see it every day. Ethan finished the dishes with a lump in his throat, listening to his daughter and his girlfriend bond over crayons and construction paper. This was what he'd been afraid of. Mia getting attached, building expectations, creating a space in her heart that could be shattered if things didn't work out. But watching them together, hearing Mia's laughter echo through their small house, he realized fear was a terrible reason to keep people apart. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that felt both precarious and right. Vivian came to Millbrook on Wednesdays after work, staying for dinner and helping with homework before driving back to Richmond. Weekends alternated. Sometimes Ethan and Mia went to the city, sometimes Vivian came to them. It wasn't perfect. There were still conflicts, still moments when work pulled Vivian away or Mia got sick and plans had to change. But they were trying, and that mattered more than perfection. Then November arrived with a phone call that changed everything. Ethan was on a job site when Marcus Chen's number appeared on his screen. He almost didn't answer. He hadn't spoken to Sarah's cousin since the strange introduction to Vivian, but curiosity won out. Marcus? What's going on? Ethan, I need to give you a heads up about something. Do you have a few minutes? Marcus sounded worried, which immediately put Ethan on edge. Yeah, I'm on break. What is it? There's a man named David Corliss. He's the owner of Corliss Industries, the company Vivian was trying to acquire before she walked away from the deal. Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. He's not taking the rejection well. He's been making threats, claiming Vivian strung him along, cost him other opportunities. My firm got contacted by his lawyers demanding compensation for time wasted. Ethan's stomach dropped. Is that legitimate? No, it's nonsense. But he's angry and vindictive, and I wanted you to know in case this escalates. Vivian's handling it, has her own legal team on it, but this guy has a reputation for getting ugly when he doesn't get his way. After hanging up, Ethan immediately called Vivian. She answered on the fourth ring, sounding distracted. Hey, I'm in a meeting. Can I call you back? Marcus just called. He told me about David Corliss. The silence on the other end was heavy. Then, I'm going to kill Marcus. I was planning to tell you about this. I just didn't want you to worry. Well, now I'm worried anyway. What's going on? It's nothing. Just a bitter man who can't handle being told no. My lawyers are dealing with it. But Ethan heard the tension underneath her casual tone. Vivian, if this guy is threatening you, he's threatening to sue, that's all. It's hot air and bluster. Happens all the time in business. She sighed. I really need to get back to this meeting. We'll talk tonight, okay? She hung up before he could press further, leaving Ethan standing in the cold November air with a bad feeling he couldn't shake. 2 weeks later, that bad feeling proved justified. Vivian was working late at her office, preparing for a presentation the next day, when her assistant buzzed her. Ms. Sterling, there's a David Corliss here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's urgent. Every instinct Vivian had told her not to agree to this meeting, but she was tired of lawyers and threats, and the constant low-grade stress of having the situation hanging over her. Maybe if she faced him directly, they could end this like adults. Send him in, she said, already regretting the decision. David Corliss was a man in his 50s, well-dressed, with the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. He settled into the chair across from her desk with practiced ease, and Vivian felt her skin crawl. Ms. Sterling, thank you for seeing me, he said, his tone pleasant in a way that felt threatening. I thought it was time we had a conversation without lawyers in the room. Mr. Corliss, if you're here to discuss your lawsuit, I have nothing to say that my legal team hasn't already communicated. Vivian kept her voice professional, but her hand moved subtly toward the panic button installed under her desk after a previous security incident. I'm not here about the lawsuit. I'm here to make you a different kind of offer. He leaned forward, and his pleasant expression dropped away to reveal something cold underneath. You walked away from our deal because of some construction worker you're sleeping with. I did my research. Ethan Reed, single father, barely keeping his head above water financially. Interesting choice for someone of your status. Vivian's blood went cold. You need to leave, now. Not until you hear me out. See, I've invested a lot of time and money into this acquisition, and when you walked away, you cost me other opportunities, damaged my reputation. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to agree to sell me Sterling Acquisitions for half its market value, or I'm going to make sure your boyfriend's life becomes very, very difficult. Are you threatening him? Vivian's voice was deadly quiet. I'm explaining consequences. Construction work is dangerous. Accidents happen. Custody battles can be brutal, especially when anonymous tips suggest a parent isn't providing adequate care. Hospital bills can pile up when insurance mysteriously stops covering certain treatments. Corliss smiled, and it was the coldest thing Vivian had ever seen. You have 48 hours to agree to my terms. After that, Mr. Reed and his daughter are going to have a very bad year. He stood, adjusting his tie like they'd just concluded a pleasant business meeting. I'll see myself out. Think carefully, Miss Sterling. Is your company really worth more than their safety? The moment he left, Vivian hit the panic button. Security came running, but Corliss was already gone, disappeared into the Richmond night. She called the police, filed a report, called her lawyers, and then, hands shaking, she called Ethan. He answered on the first ring. Hey, I was just about to call you. Mia made the honor roll, and Ethan, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Vivian's voice was shaking. David Corliss just left my office. He threatened you and Mia. I've called the police, but I need you to be careful. Lock your doors. Don't let Mia out of your sight. And slow down. What happened? Vivian told him everything, her voice breaking as she repeated Corliss's threats. When she finished, there was a long silence on the other end. I'm coming to Richmond, Ethan said finally, his voice tight with controlled fury. Right now, my mom can watch Mia. No, you need to stay with her. Keep her safe. Vivian was already grabbing her keys, her coat. I'm coming to you. Pack a bag for both of you. You're staying at my place until we figure this out. Vivian, we can't just uproot our lives. He threatened your daughter. Vivian's voice cracked. This is my fault. I walked away from his deal and now he's coming after you to hurt me. I will not let him touch either of you. This isn't your fault. This is some psychopath who can't handle rejection. Ethan's voice softened. But okay, come here. We'll figure this out together. Vivian made the drive to Millbrook in record time, her mind racing through every possible scenario and countermove. She'd built a successful company by staying calm under pressure, by outthinking her opponents, by never letting emotion cloud her judgment. But this wasn't a business deal. This was Ethan and Mia, the two people who'd become her family when she wasn't looking. And the thought of them in danger because of her made her want to burn down the world. She found them packed and waiting, Mia looking confused and scared, Ethan looking like he was barely holding it together. Vivian gathered them both into her car and drove back to Richmond with one hand on the wheel and the other holding Ethan's, while Mia slept in the back seat clutching her stuffed rabbit. Her penthouse had never felt more like a fortress. The building had security, cameras, a doorman who knew not to let anyone up without clearance. Vivian got them settled, showed Mia the guest room she'd already started decorating with things she thought an 8-year-old might like, and tried to pretend this was a fun adventure instead of protective custody. After Mia was asleep, Ethan found Vivian standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city lights with her arms wrapped around herself. We should call the police again, he said quietly. Make sure they're taking this seriously. I already called. They're treating it as a credible threat, but without concrete evidence of intent to harm, there's not much they can do except keep a record. Vivian's voice was hollow. My lawyers are working on a restraining order, but that's just paper. It won't stop him if he really wants to hurt you. Ethan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. This isn't your fault. You keep saying that, but if I hadn't walked away from that deal, if I'd just finished the acquisition instead of prioritizing us, then you'd have your company and I'd have nothing. No you, no us, just the same lonely existence I'd been living for 3 years. Ethan turned her around to face him. You made the right choice. Corliss is the one making wrong choices. Don't let him make you regret choosing life over work. Vivian pressed her face against his chest, breathing in his familiar scent, trying to find calm in the solid warmth of him. I'm scared. I've handled angry business partners before, but this feels different. He knows exactly where to hit to hurt me most. Then we don't give him the opportunity. Ethan pulled back to look at her. What if we go public? Tell the story. Crazy businessman threatens CEO and her boyfriend over failed deal. Get ahead of it, make it too high profile for him to act without consequences. Vivian's mind was already racing. That could work. Media attention would make him back off, or at least think twice. But it would also expose you and Mia to scrutiny. Everyone would know your business. Better than the alternative. Ethan's jaw was set with determination. Make the calls. I'll handle whatever comes with going public. The next morning, Vivian's publicist orchestrated a carefully controlled media release. Business CEO receives threats over failed acquisition. Boyfriend and child move to secure location while police investigate. By noon, it was headline news. By evening, David Corliss's lawyers were calling to issue statements claiming misunderstanding, suggesting their client had been taken out of context. Vivian's legal team smelled blood in the water. They pushed harder, filed more motions, and within 48 hours had Corliss so buried in legal trouble that he didn't have time to make good on any threats. The restraining order came through. Security footage from Vivian's office building showed him entering and leaving, corroborating her story, And most importantly, the public attention meant any accident involving Ethan or Mia would be immediately connected to Corliss. A week later, his lawyers contacted Vivian's team with a settlement offer. He'd drop all litigation, issue a public apology, and never contact her or anyone in her circle again in exchange for no criminal charges. Vivian's lawyers advised her to take it. Getting him to actually go to jail would be difficult with just verbal threats on record, but this way they'd have a legally binding agreement with teeth. "Take it," Ethan said when she asked his opinion. "I don't need him in jail. I just need him gone." Vivian signed the settlement agreement in her lawyer's office, with Ethan beside her, and felt a weight lift that she'd been carrying for weeks. It was over. They were safe. They could go back to their lives, except their lives had fundamentally changed in the process. That evening, back at Vivian's penthouse with Mia doing homework at the dining room table, Ethan pulled Vivian aside into the kitchen. "We need to talk about what happens next." "We go back to Millbrook, back to your house, back to our normal routine," Vivian said. But even as she said it, she knew it sounded wrong. "Is that what you want? To go back to splitting our time between two places, always rushing, always trying to fit into each other's schedules?" Ethan leaned against the counter, his expression serious. "This past week, having you and Mia here together, being a family even under terrible circumstances, it showed me what we could have if we stopped treating this like a long-distance relationship and started treating it like a real life." Vivian's heart was pounding. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want more than weekend visits and Wednesday dinners. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want Mia to have you in her life full time, not just when schedules align. I want us to actually build something instead of just maintaining what we have." He took her hands, his thumbs brushing across her knuckles. "Move in with us. Or let us move in with you. I don't care which. I just want us to stop being separated by 45 minutes and a bunch of excuses. Ethan, your job is in Millbrook, and that house, you've built a life there. A life that was mostly about survival and routine. You showed me I could have more than that." He smiled, a little sad, a little hopeful. "Sarah would have liked you. She always said I needed someone who'd challenge me, push me to actually live instead of just getting through days. And that rental house? It's just a place. It was never home after Sarah died. Home is wherever you and Mia are." Vivian felt tears building, overwhelmed by the enormity of what he was offering. "What about Mia's school, her friends, your mother?" "Richmond has good schools. She can make new friends. My mom would probably be thrilled to have an excuse to visit the city more often." Ethan cupped her face in his hands. "I'm not saying it'll be easy. I'll need to find work here, figure out childcare logistics, navigate a whole new life. But I'm ready to do that. The question is, do you want us here?" Vivian looked past him to where Mia sat at the table, surrounded by textbooks and papers, completely at home in Vivian's space. She thought about waking up to both of them every morning, about not having to say goodbye after dinner, about building the kind of family she'd thought she'd lost the chance for when Michael died. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, I want you here. I want this to be home for all of us." Ethan kissed her then, deep and sure, a promise being made and accepted. When they broke apart, Mia was standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, trying to look stern but failing to hide her smile. "Does this mean we're moving here? Because I want the room with the window seat, and we need to get a dog," Vivian promised. "I did not promise," Vivian protested, laughing through her tears. "I said maybe someday." "Well, someday is now," Mia declared with 8-year-old logic. "We're a family, right? Families have dogs." Ethan looked at Vivian with an expression that asked if she knew what she was signing up for. Vivian looked back at both of them. This man who'd walked into her office for $10,000 and ended up giving her everything that mattered, and this little girl who'd somehow decided Vivian was worth keeping, and felt her heart overflow with gratitude for the life she'd almost been too afraid to accept. "Families have dogs," she agreed, "but you're in charge of walking it." Mia squealed and launched herself at both of them, and they stood there in the kitchen of Vivian's penthouse, holding each other. And Vivian thought about how strange it was that the best things in life came from the most unlikely places. The next few months were chaos. Ethan found work with a construction firm in Richmond that paid better than Morrison ever had. Mia started at a new school, and after a rough first few weeks, made friends with a girl in her class who also loved fishing and storytelling. They adopted a rescue dog, a golden retriever mix named Captain, who was terrible at listening but excellent at making everyone laugh. And Vivian learned how to balance running a company with being present for dinner most nights, with helping with homework, with the million small moments that made up a family life. It wasn't perfect. There were arguments about whose turn it was to do laundry, about Vivian working too late, about Ethan being overprotective when Mia wanted to try new things, but they worked through it, learned each other's rhythms, built something real from the foundation of their fake weekend arrangement. Spring arrived with an invitation from Caroline and Richard Sterling for Easter weekend at the lake house. Vivian accepted without the dread she'd once felt, because this time she wasn't showing up pretending to have her life together. This time, she actually did. They drove up on Good Friday, Captain panting happily in the back seat next to Mia, who was chattering about the fish she was going to catch. Ethan drove while Vivian navigated and occasionally reached over to squeeze his hand, still amazed sometimes that this was her life now. Caroline and Richard greeted them with genuine warmth, Richard offering to show Ethan his new boat, while Caroline pulled Vivian aside with knowing eyes. "You look happy," Caroline said simply. "Really, truly happy, in a way I've never seen you." "I am," Vivian said, watching Ethan and Mia head down to the dock with fishing poles, Captain bounding after them. "It's messy and complicated and nothing like what I planned. But it's real. That's all we ever wanted for you, sweetheart. Not perfection, just realness." Caroline hugged her daughter and Vivian hugged her back, finally understanding that her mother's concern had always come from love, not judgment. That evening, after a dinner where Mia charmed everyone with stories about her new school and Captain stole a roll off Richard's plate, Vivian found Ethan on the dock where they'd sat during that rainy weekend back in October. The lake was calm, reflecting the stars, and the air was warm with the promise of summer. "Thinking about how far we've come?" Ethan asked, pulling her down to sit beside him. "Thinking about how none of this was supposed to happen. I hired you for 3 days. That's all it was supposed to be." Vivian leaned her head on his shoulder. "Best $10,000 I ever spent." "About that," Ethan said, reaching into his pocket. "I've been meaning to give you something." He pulled out a check, already filled out, $10,000, made out to Vivian Sterling, signed in his careful handwriting. Vivian stared at it, confused. "What is this?" "Paying you back. Took me 6 months of saving, but I did it." Ethan pressed the check into her hand. "The deal was you'd pay me to pretend to be your boyfriend for a weekend. The weekend's long over. This isn't pretend anymore, so I'm returning your money." Vivian looked at the check, then at Ethan, then slowly tore it in half. "You're an idiot." "Excuse me?" "An idiot with a good heart, but still an idiot." She tossed the pieces into the lake, watching them float away. That money was never about the weekend. It was about taking a chance on something that scared both of us. Consider it an investment that paid better returns than I could have imagined. Ethan laughed, pulling her closer. "You're probably right. I could have used that money for a ring." Vivian's heart stopped. "What?" "Well, not yet. We've only been living together for 4 months. But eventually." He kissed her temple. "If you're okay with that, if you're okay with this being forever instead of just an experiment." "I'm more than okay with it," Vivian whispered, feeling tears prick at her eyes. "I'm ready for it. Whenever you are." They sat there in comfortable silence, watching the stars reflect on the water, and Vivian thought about the woman who'd cornered a construction worker in her office with a desperate proposal, so afraid of letting anyone see her vulnerability that she'd hired a stranger rather than show up alone. That woman felt like someone from another lifetime. Behind them, the lake house glowed with warm light. Through the windows, Vivian could see Mia showing Caroline something on her phone, both of them laughing. Richard was demonstrating something to Captain, who was far more interested in the treat Richard held than whatever lesson was being taught. "Come on," Ethan said, standing and offering her his hand. "Let's go be with our family." Our family. The words settled in Vivian's chest like coming home. 6 months later, on a crisp October evening, exactly 1 year after their first weekend at the lake house, Ethan proposed on that same dock. Mia had helped him plan it, hiding in the boathouse with Caroline and Richard, ready to burst out with champagne and congratulations the moment Vivian said yes. She said yes before he even finished the question. The wedding was small, held at the lake house the following spring. Mia served as maid of honor, carrying rings attached to Captain's collar, which would have worked perfectly if Captain hadn't gotten distracted by a duck and dragged Mia halfway down the aisle before Ethan caught them both. Everyone laughed, including Vivian, who stood at the end of that aisle in a simple white dress, watching her family chaos unfold with nothing but joy. Marcus Chen officiated, since it seemed fitting that the man who'd brought them together should be the one to make it official. When Ethan and Vivian exchanged vows they'd written themselves, there wasn't a dry eye among the small gathering of friends and family. "You were supposed to be a 3-day arrangement," Vivian said, her voice shaking with emotion. "A simple transaction that solved a problem. Instead, you became my home, my heart, my reminder that life is meant to be lived and not just survived. I promised to show up for you and for Mia every single day, to choose love over fear, and to never forget that the best things come from taking chances on unlikely possibilities." Ethan's vows were simpler but no less powerful. "I was so focused on just getting through each day that I forgot to actually live. You reminded me what it feels like to hope, to dream, to believe in more than just survival. You gave me back the future I thought I'd lost. I promise to love you fiercely, support you completely, and remind you every day that you are enough exactly as you are." When Marcus pronounced them married, Mia cheered so loudly that Captain started barking, which set off a chain reaction of laughter and celebration that perfectly captured who they were as a family: chaotic, imperfect, and overflowing with love. The reception spilled from the house onto the lawn with string lights and music and dancing. Richard cornered Ethan for another chess game that he let Ethan win this time. Caroline taught Mia how to waltz, both of them laughing as they spun across the grass. And Vivian stood with her new husband, watching their people celebrate around them, feeling gratitude so profound it took her breath away. Later, after the guests had left and Mia was asleep upstairs with Captain sprawled across her feet, Ethan and Vivian walked down to the water one last time. The lake was quiet, peaceful, holding the reflection of a full moon. "A year ago, I was standing in my office trying to figure out how to survive one weekend with my parents," Vivian said, lacing her fingers through Ethan's. "I never imagined it would lead to this. A year ago, I was drowning in bills and desperation, ready to do anything to keep my daughter healthy," Ethan replied. "I definitely didn't imagine it would lead to this." "Do you regret it?" Vivian asked, though she already knew the answer. "Not for a second." Ethan turned to face her, his hand settling on her waist. "Best worst decision I ever made, saying yes to your crazy proposal." Vivian laughed, pulling him close for a kiss that tasted like champagne and promises and the future they were building together. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his and whispered, "Thank you for taking a chance on me, on us." "Always," Ethan said, "for as long as we both shall live." And there, on the dock where they'd first let their walls fall and their hearts open, under stars that had witnessed the unlikely beginning of their love story, Vivian Sterling Reed and Ethan Reed held each other and knew they'd finally found what they'd both been searching for without knowing it. A home that wasn't a place but a person. A family built not by blood or obligation, but by choice and love and the courage to let someone in despite the risk. A future that was uncertain and messy and absolutely perfect in its imperfection. 3 months after the wedding, Mia drew another family portrait for art class. This one showed 4 people now: her, Ethan, Vivian, and a new addition she'd been hinting at for weeks. When her teacher asked who the 4th person was, Mia explained with the confidence of a child who knew exactly what she wanted. "That's going to be my baby brother or sister. We don't know yet, but it's going to happen, because my family keeps getting bigger and better, and that's how love works." When Vivian saw the picture, tears streaming down her face, as she looked at the small figure Mia had drawn with such hope and certainty, Ethan wrapped his arms around her from behind and whispered, "What do you think? Should we make Mia's drawing come true?" Vivian turned in his arms, seeing her whole life reflected in his eyes. The man who'd started as a transaction and became her everything. The daughter who'd claimed her as family. The dog currently destroying a couch cushion in the next room, and the possibility of even more love to give. "Yeah," she said, kissing him with everything she felt. "Let's make it come true." And they did. Because sometimes the best things in life come from the most unlikely beginnings. Sometimes a fake relationship becomes the realest thing you've ever known. Sometimes a desperate proposal for one weekend becomes a lifetime of love. Sometimes you just have to be brave enough to say yes, even when the odds seem impossible and the outcome uncertain. Sometimes love finds you in the most unexpected places, and all you have to do is be willing to let it in.